was just thinking about like the pace of life we have between OR and meetings.
I know. It's crazy. I mean, you've done, I feel like you're like full throttle, full engaged in this year. I'm sure it's been crazy, but we do run at a pretty high pace and it's sort of go, go, go. I know every day that I have that's busy, you have another one with BOFNA the same way. So it's, you've been like pulling double duties. I'm sure it's been crazy.
As busy as I think I am, I think you've got to be even busier. We just came from ACOS in Deer Valley, Utah. And then literally 48 hours later, we're doing like 50 plus cataracts. How many surgery days do you have lined up this week?
So today, this week I've got 3 surgery, 2 cataract days. So I'll probably do 90 cataracts or more. And then however many LASIK we do Friday. And then I'll be off again to the shore Saturday, back again next week. We probably 2 or 3 cataracts days next week. So it seems like right now we're on track to be doing every week 100 plus surgeries, like either cataract, LASIK, or both, or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's what I was referencing earlier. I keep thinking back to that week where you literally operated 5 days every morning cataract surgery, and then I think we had 2 or 3 laser vision correction days that week as well, and we must have done 300 plus eyes.
Yeah, totally.
Between you, me, and Shamek. So it's just, but you think about like the impact that makes on people.
Yeah,
as surgeons, we're always trying to think, how can we have better outcomes, do things more efficiently, help more people, but that's incredible.
Yeah. And we're always, and people will say like, okay, well, when you're doing that kind of volume, I think you and I have discussed it. It seems to me, there's this correlation, inverse correlation of volume to complication rate. And more or less the only way to do that kind of volume, you have to eliminate virtually every complication. So if you can imagine, if you have a 10% complication rate, well, 300 cases in a month, okay, that means you have, let's say, 30 complicated cases spread over a month. But if you do 300 cases in a week and have a 10% complication rate, that's 30 complicated situations in that week that there's no way you can handle, your staff can handle, your referring doctors can handle. So more or less, the only way to continue higher volume is to more or less eliminate any potential complication. And so that sort of leads us to things like, say the drop regimen we have. Some people might say, okay, well, why are you doing intraocular antibiotics, intraocular steroids, plus postoperative, steroid, antibiotic, NSAID, and why are you doing both? Some people just do one or the other, and sort of more or less we've looked at like, okay, by adding the NSAID, we're going to reduce our CME rate by 2% to go from, let's say, 3% down to less than 1% or whatever it is. And someone are like, does it really matter? But at 300 cases in a week, that 2%, that's 6 cases of CME that you can eliminate by doing things like that.
Yeah. Volume reveals all.
Yes.
And I love this. I actually brought this up to some friends when I was at ACOS, and I told them I don't want to dive too deep into this because I feel like this is like an hour or 2 long conversation in and of itself. Because I feel like the general perception is high volume means low quality. And people who are high volume surgeons are doing 5 or 6 minute cataracts. They're just rushing. They're cutting corners. They're not giving the patient their best, when it's actually the complete opposite. Because if you have complications or you have bad outcomes, patients are not going to be happy. You're going to get bad reviews. You're not going to get patients coming to you for surgery. And it's just going to slow you down. Having a complication, to manage that properly, just adds more time to your schedule. So to be high volume, to do a lot of surgery means you have refined your craft to the highest level. And I love that you brought it up in terms of not just surgery, but every part of the patient experience. So it's not just, is there a surgical complication, but maybe they were having dysphotopsias afterwards. Maybe they were having a little pain from, an injection or something like that. And so every aspect of the process through high volume has to get refined if you really want to be delivering the best outcomes and doing it in an efficacious and efficient manner.
Totally. That's exactly right. So volume reveals all. And so I think that's a great way to look at it. I think anesthesia is one of those aspects that can be easily overlooked, but an uncomfortable patient is going to tell, 1 or 2 other patients, family members, they may not come back for their second eye. They're going to tell the referring doctor, gosh, I was there, I had some discomfort. And so if you can look at what we've done for our anesthesia protocols, we're constantly looking to try to maximize the most comfortable situation from, let's say the MKO melt, so sublingual medications combined with IV medications combined with hand holding, combined with just the way we lay the stretcher or whatever, the lighting in the room, all those things sort of add up to more or less making that comfortable patient experience. And anesthesia is a big portion of that. And if you're just doing a few cases, you might be able to tolerate a little bit of discomfort, but at a certain volume, you really have to make sure every single patient is as comfortable as they can be. And so it kind of constantly pushes that sort of innovation cycle. And I think that's where you see a lot of the high volume centers innovating with whatever technique. It might be innovation in a surgical technique, or innovation in anesthesia, or innovation with a outcome, efficacy or safety, because they see where those potential pitfalls are, and they're always looking to kind of find what we call the pain points in the process. And so at a certain lower volume, you just might not see the pain points, or it might not really be that meaningful, but at a certain volume, it becomes evident that the limiting factor to go to the next level is going to be that pain point, and you have to look for some solution to make that easier.
What we're talking about is really taking a granular deep dive at all parts of the process. And you see this in industries, in manufacturing, in business, supply chains, where you're trying to figure out what are the weak points or the pain points, where are the delays happening, where could things become more efficient. You would think that all surgeons would want to make their surgery the best it can be, to give the patient the best outcomes they can. And I don't think the majority of surgeons are slackers or lazy or don't care about any of that stuff. But it really takes a degree of passion to care about those small details like lighting, or the kind of drape you're using, or the temperature in the room, or whether or not the patient has a blanket on them, or whether or not someone's holding their hand during surgery because to alleviate anxiety. Where did you learn to have that eye for such fine detail? Is that something that just developed over time in private practice? Was it instilled in you from your dad or through training?
Yeah, good point. I think, I look back, a lot of it was instilled through my father. He had a passion. He gave this annual talk called Service America. And basically, realizing that medicine was, very much in the service industry, and always trying to sort of provide better customer service. And this was back in the day when medicine was sort of, was it an expectation or sort of just a duty, or is it truly customer service? And, that's when they transcended sort of inpatient cataract surgery to outpatient cataract surgery to finally ASC cataract surgery. So there's a lot of innovation cycle that was going on through that. And he realized, customer service was going to be a key portion of that. So I remember, growing up, I actually had gotten in trouble a couple of times. I was maybe not the best kid in teenage life. I remember I snuck out, got caught like sneaking out to go to parties or whatever it was, and got grounded once. And then I did it again like 2 weeks later. And my dad sat me down. He's like, okay, it seems like grounding didn't work. He's like, here's a project. He's like, I want you to read these 4 books. And there were basically, now I look back on it, there are 4 books on customer service. And he was doing a talk at an upcoming meeting about customer service. He said, okay, I want a book report on these 4 books and explain what's going on. And they still resonate today. Some of the examples that they talk about where one, let's say, happy patient tells 4 patients about their experience. One unhappy patient tells 10 patients. So more or less, the math is going to say you got to eliminate all unhappy patients and then try to, encourage happy patients. And then now we look at the sort of the math is sort of compounded. If you look at what the internet does to that, one unhappy patient can not only, it used to be 10 patients, now they can literally tell 1 million patients with one post that goes viral about their negative experience. So the stakes are so much higher. But having that early sort of passion for customer service, a lot of it instilled from my father, from being sort of a rambunctious kid and getting in a bit of trouble. So he kind of instilled that, and all those lessons sort of still resonate, but the stakes are even higher now.
14-year-old Bill Wiley sitting down learning about the patient experience from such a young age. You bring up a good point. The social media, what a double-edged sword.
Right.
Because I feel, especially think about what we do for laser vision correction light. We have our setup in a glass suite.
Yeah.
So friends, family members, they can come watch if they want to. And so many times they're taking videos, they're taking photos, and they're either saving that as a memory so they can go back or show friends or family, or so they can post it on social media and get people either within their tight circle or from around the world, strangers, to delve into the conversation. And we can talk about the pressure that puts on a surgeon to really perform later, but even just thinking about, just not everyone always is on point, has a great day. So imagine if not just in medicine, but even in any service industry, you have an interaction with a customer or a patient, and you happen to have a bad day, or you're a little curt, or the way you say something doesn't come out right the way you want it to. Social media has the ability to take that moment in time, which otherwise might not have ever been of any significance. Maybe a day or two later, the allegedly wrong person would just give them benefit of the doubt and move on. But in that moment, with the emotions running high, they post something on social media, and now all of a sudden it's trending nationally, internationally, and all these people are weighing in. And then you have cancel culture weighing in.
Yeah.
There's a lot of power behind that.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the stakes are just so high, and so you're always under that spotlight. And if it's not you, it's your team, it's your front desk person, or it's the call center, or it's the billing team. That every step of the way, there's a chance for something to go awry. And for some reason, it seems like the unhappy patient seems to get hit multiple times with unpleasant situations. Maybe it was the call center dropped the ball, coupled with the billing center, coupled with the front desk or the technician, then the surgeon. If we all missed up a little bit, it piles on. And now that patient's looking for every little thing and being a bit more critical, versus if you can turn it around and have that smile at the front desk, or the smile at the call center, or a great explanation of the billing department. There, you sort of set the positive tone, and it makes everyone's job easier. And so it's such a balance and so critical. And thankfully, we've got a great team that's worked hard, understands it, and is motivated to kind of be on that path. But it seems things have definitely changed. It kind of just talking to you, it makes me think of a couple unique patients or unique situations, sort of going that above and beyond. I remember when I first practiced, my dad had said, Bill, there's going to be some times where a patient's going to have an issue, and it might be worthwhile to do a house call and see them at home. And so, seemingly this day and age, it's almost unheard of to do house calls. I don't know if you've ever done a house call.
I have not.
I think we talked about this. Were you with me when we were talking with Rob? Or I can't remember. Actually, we were having a dinner and we're talking about crazy situations. I'm like, oh, how many house calls have you guys done? And everybody kind of looked at me like, what have you done? Like, well, how have you done any? And I look back, and there's been probably 4 times I can think of that I've done house calls for unique situations. So one of them was when my first year in practice. It was the day or 2 days before Thanksgiving, and I was about to fly out the next day. I was doing surgery, had one day of post-op, and I was going to go away to Thanksgiving. And I remember we got this snowstorm that had come in, and we had a foot of snow, and just blanketed the whole city. And there was one patient that was a very challenging case that I had the day before. It was this dense 4+ NS that I had to convert to extra cap. I had to put like 6 stitches in, and it was early case. I think I had an anterior vitrectomy. So I was like, I got to see that guy. His pressure could be 50, and what's going to go on. And so the next day, the whole town was more or less shut down. And, all our clinics had closed, except I think we had one clinic that was seeing patients, and it's downtown Cleveland. And so we called the patient. The patient's like, listen, there's a foot of snow on my street. I can't even get out. And he was about 80. His wife was there. And so I remember I grabbed my technician. I'm like, well, we can pick the patient up. We got my truck. I had his Jeep, and we drove down, got to his house, and he actually had a prosthetic leg, and so he's hard to move. So we put him in the Jeep, shoveled his driveway, put him in the Jeep, drove him to, I think we had to like help him get his prosthetic leg on. It's this whole thing. And then we get to the clinic, check his eye out. Everything looks good. But that sort of experience, their whole family kind of saw that situation. They're like, oh my gosh, this Dr. Wiley like went and picked my dad up, took him to the clinic, made sure his eye was okay. And many of those family members are sort of my patients for life. One of them still gives me a case of wine every year just as a thank you for taking care of his father. So it's interesting, like those little things that you can go above and beyond that, that aren't expected really go a long way. And seemingly in this day and age where very few things like that are done, every little step means that much more. So there's huge opportunities to kind of do that type of above and beyond customer service.
So I know you, and so I know you would do that. If we had a week where we did 300-400 cataracts in patients, you would do that for any one of them.
Yeah.
But you, like exactly what you just said, that sort of service or that level of commitment to the patient, I feel like, is very rare, because there's so many barriers in today's day and age, so many ways you can come up with excuses like, oh, it's not my fault, the weather was really bad, and if the patient really was having issues, they would come in. But where did you get that level of, like, your first thought wasn't like, It was like you went through a lot to see that patient, shovel the driveway, drive them to clinic. It wasn't just a matter of doing a house call.
Yeah, I think, it's a good question. Maybe it was just fear or pressure of maybe early running my practice. I had bought the practice from my father early on. And from day one, there was this sort of pressure to succeed or make sure the practice was successful. A lot of our referring doctors were judging me compared to my father, who had done, probably 100,000 cataracts in his career, and I'm coming in having done 100 out of residency or whatever it was. And so now I'm being compared. I've always had this sort of, pressure to perform, and if I couldn't do it technically, at least, make sure the service was as good. And so it was coming out of that, had, taken out a note, to pay my father back, and sort of had this financial pressure to succeed, personal pressure to succeed. And so any little thing, it sort of, it just kind of pushed us to make sure that we were meeting or exceeding patient expectations. And some of those opportunities were like that, became evident.
So for how long were you practicing side by side with your father before you bought the practice from him?
So it's interesting. It's pretty quickly he transitioned out. We probably worked together for about 2 or 3 months. But after about 2 or 3 months, he sort of made a decision. At the time, I think he basically saw the path for my success was going to be turning the practice over as quickly as possible. He sort of realized that if referring doctors or patients had a choice of senior Wiley or junior Wiley, they were going to choose senior Wiley 9 out of 10 times. So he said, you know what, if I exit quickly, the choice will be, just, Bill Wiley. And I think that, he did his best to kind of get me up to speed surgically and clinically and running the business. But as soon as he felt comfortable, it was like 2 or 3 months, he said, okay, I'm going to exit, and thus, just have sort of one choice. And in a way, it was very good. It got me busy quickly, but it was also a fair amount of pressure early on. So there was some good and bad about it. But I think in retrospect, I think he may have enjoyed working longer, but I think it was in a way a gift from him to me to pass the torch quickly and to sort of jumpstart my career.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when you, I guess, took over after that transition, when you bought the practice from him, were there other partners at the time, or was it really just Bill Wiley solo now?
Yeah. So initially it was just Bill Wiley surgically. There was we had Tom Chester, who became my partner, who's an optometrist, and Jeff Augustine and Jeff Kissinger, a few of my OD and business partners that came early on, that had worked with my father. But initially, I had bought the practice straight up, and then kind of brought in other partners after that.
And was the plan, like, when did you realize you were going to join your dad or take the practice over from him? Was that always the plan when you started ophthalmology residency?
It's interesting. I tried to keep an open mind. I interviewed around the country and looked at other opportunities, looked at even starting my own practice in Cleveland. At the time, my dad said, okay, this is the price of the practice. You can come in and buy it. And I thought, gosh, it seems expensive. Maybe I should just go and hang a shingle. And I had some advice, some early mentors, like, you do not want to go and compete with your father. You want to be, number one, you want to show up at Thanksgiving and be happy and have, a great family. I said, whatever your dad's charging, it is going to be more than fair. And, bottom line, he thought he gave it to me underpriced, and I thought I overpaid. And so he probably had the right price. But anyways, but I did look at other opportunities, interviewed with even doctors locally in town, and said, well, maybe I'll join this doc that at the time were competitors. Thank God I did not go down those paths. Like, probably wouldn't be speaking at this point.
Yeah, that would be some very ugly conversation around the Thanksgiving dinner table. So Is it with your dad? I've never actually met your dad. I've heard so much about him from all the staff members that have been here, especially on the Clear Choice side of things for 10, 15 years. And especially in Toledo as well. And everyone always has these stories about him being this innovator and just thinking outside the box, and whether that's in surgery or the way clinics are run, co-management, that sort of thing. And having never met him, all of those qualities I totally see in you as well. And so I wonder, did you know ophthalmology like growing up from a very young age before you even went to undergrad? Was that always your path to become a physician, become a surgeon?
Yeah, I mean, early on, it was definitely my passion. I certainly sciences and math and those sort of things in high school and college. I suppose in med school, I looked at everything, that was out there. I was looking at ortho or derm. But what's interesting is something about that early exposure to ophthalmology puts you on a track that's unique. I look at, let's say, a lot of my friends within ophthalmology are, legacy doc, Rob Weinstock and George Waring, Zaldivar, Toby Tyson. There's the list is longer than them. I'm sure I'm blanking on them, but there's doc after doc after doc. Bill Trattler. So many of my close friends within the field have fathers that are ophthalmologists, and so I think what happens is, med school, nobody's really good at ophthalmology. It seems like this foreign language, and most people struggle when they're exposed to it if you hadn't been exposed to it. But growing up, if you just know a little bit about it, you tend to excel quickly, and you tend to like what you excel at. And so a lot of the people that are in this legacy path sort of find their way in their parents' footsteps, and it's kind of a unique thing within medicine, I suppose.
So you joined your dad straight out of residency. So you were what, 30, 29?
Yeah, so about 30 years old.
And your dad was in his 50s?
Yeah, so he was, it's interesting. He was 59 when I joined him, and then he was retired within the year or so. So he retired right around 60, which I feel like is crazy because that's only a decade away from where I sit now. And I think to myself, gosh, I feel like my career is going to be longer than that, but you never know. So, so I think in retrospect, he probably would have enjoyed working for maybe another 10 years. But I think he had worked like in his last 5 years, he was probably burning out. He was wild. He had literally LASIK clinics from Chicago, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, basically over 10 states in the Midwest, East Coast. He had LASIK centers, and he would have a van that would take the lasers from one location to the other. He was doing, a lot of those centers, 100 LASIK a day, and showing up, and just banging them out. Then the laser might have a problem, and they'd work till 2, 3, 4 a.m., finishing the LASIK cases, then getting packed up to go to another LASIK center. So he was on the road literally 4 or 5 days a week. And that's when LASIK was exploding. He kind of had put cataracts to the side, and LASIK was going to be his main income. And actually here in Cleveland, he was doing just, I think, 3 half days a month of work to support a whole practice. So if you can imagine like what we're doing now. So he would come into Cleveland just 3 days a month, mostly do cataracts, and then worked with some optometrists that would kind of get the patients keyed up for him. And then those other, 17 days of the month, he was off doing LASIK. And so when I came in, the eye clinic was relatively small compared to what it is now, but it had a great foundation, great reputation, great referral pattern. And so we just started with one clinic when I bought it from my father, and then we ended up expanding, merging the LASIK clinic to the eye clinic, and then building an ASC, and then multiple other locations. So that was, kind of long story short, so sort of the path of that transition.
And tell me about, I'm curious to hear this story about how your dad really brought co-management into the forefront of practice. At least that's what I've heard.
Yeah. So if you look back, it would have been in the early 90s, maybe late 80s. I don't know the exact timeline, but there's a time where more or less co-management was totally frowned upon. And most of the doctors, there was very much a us versus them mentality. You had optometrists and ophthalmologists, very little sharing of patients from one to the other. At that time, optometrists could not do dilating drops. They did not have prescribing license. They couldn't prescribe, glaucoma medications. Very limited scope of practice for optometry within the state. And then Then there was sort of a transition where the optometry had a change in their scope of practice, and some of the doctors, some of the ophthalmologists sort of supported that with, let's say, CE meetings, collaboration, working with those optometrists if the optometrist had prescribed a medication and maybe there's trouble, or they prescribed a glaucoma medication and a patient ended up having, ultimately some kind of complication or whatever it was, depending where that patient landed, one ophthalmologist might totally throw that optometrist under the bus and more or less, sort of try to end their career path, versus some of the ophthalmologists were more supportive to their, eye colleagues, and more, the doctors that did that, I think, were sort of endeared by the optometrists and built long-lasting relationships that those optometrists remembered. And I still work with many of those optometrists today that talk about their career path, how they, were taught how to just do simple things like dilating the eye or, glaucoma medication, whatever it is. And so that started the relationship. And then, initially it was sort of an informal referral of patients for cataract surgery. And then when co-management was more or less endorsed by the Medicare and OIG, that model sort of exploded, and the practice became much busier under that sort of relationship.
So, by all accounts, your dad was an amazing physician, amazing surgeon, and you're joining him now, fresh out of residency. What is that like? Not just trying to fit into the footsteps of someone who's built this reputation, is known for quality of service, quality of care, for being on the cutting edge, the latest procedures, but he's also your dad and shares the same name. So there's the pressure of trying to get caught up surgically and in terms of the medicine aspect of things out of residency, but now you have this other pressure as well.
Sure.
How do you handle that?
I think it was, I suppose when you're 30, you're the world is your oyster. You really don't understand that type of pressure. You're just like, okay, this is great. I'm off and going, and didn't think too much about it. I look back at it now and see, maybe it was, I probably just was naive and didn't necessarily know or understand what I was getting into, and just was happy to do it and excited to do it. But thankfully I had, great training. The residency program that I chose was very much geared towards gearing up a doctor to go down a private practice path, to feel confident in a clinic, feel confident in the operating room, to feel confident with cash paying patients with refractive surgery. And so I trained at Rush in Chicago, and I look at my mentors at the time, and they really did a great job of preparing me to go down this path to take over my father's practice. I think not every residency program would have been geared to that. I think some residency programs are more geared to go down an academic path that might have been sort of gearing you for more research or publications or fellowships. Not saying it's right or wrong, just a different path that might not have been suitable to take over a large private practice from day one. But the residency program that I had chosen was perfect for that.
It's really interesting. I think pre-pandemic at the Academy in 2019, if I'm getting my dates right, during the opening session, they showed a slide or two delineating the breakdown of ophthalmologists who are at academic centers, who work in hospitals, and who are in private practice or solo practitioners. And I think there was a third of ophthalmologists who were in solo private practice. I feel like we're one of the last frontier, one of the last subspecialties where there's still a significant amount of the practitioners that are in private practice that haven't been bought by the hospital system, that haven't migrated back towards the academic institutions. Do you still, like, in a post-pandemic world, that's still the way to go? Do you think that's feasible?
So in a post-pandemic world, how are things changing? And I think, the field is constantly in flux, and I feel like things ebb and flow. And for the young ophthalmologist that's coming out of training, I think they have a few different paths. They can look at an academic path, working for a hospital system. You can look at a private practice path, or you can look at a private equity path. And I see that there's this term called sort of fragmentation of a market or of a field. And let's say dentistry would have been termed a very fragmented field. And then groups, investment groups, let's say like private equity, looked at that fragmentation and saw an opportunity to have consolidation, and with consolidation having some economies of scale to hopefully then provide either better care or more economical care, more efficient care, broad spread care, maybe having better contracts, whatever it might be. And so you look at what's happening in ophthalmology, there's definitely been a trend towards consolidation through this sort of fragmented market. So without a doubt, traditionally you would have had, let's say, strong academic institutions coupled with a number of private practices, but smaller private practices that were sort of fragmenting a general market. And so over time, you've seen consolidation. It's not necessarily always consolidation through private equity. You see this consolidation through the strong practices, let's say, buying some of the retiring surgeons. And with the complexity of healthcare and EMR and insurance contracting, there is some sort of safety in numbers that's going on. But even that itself can be a trend where over time, as the market changes, we might start seeing more boutique practices coming out that are sort of saying, we don't necessarily need EMR. We don't necessarily need to bill insurance. Let's go cash pay. And so you might see a new wave of independent practitioners, solo practitioners going out hanging a shingle, which for a while wasn't so common, but we might start to see that as the market tends to shift or change. You might start seeing, let's say, in-office cataract surgery being an alternative to, let's say, an ASC cataract surgery or hospital-based cataract surgery. And the reason being is sort of as the markets change, the young doctors are going to, the young, strong providers are going to look to see what's the best way to provide the best care for a given market. And maybe that's within a health system, maybe that's within private equity, maybe that's within, a boutique practice that's self-pay, let's say. So it's interesting. There's always going to be ebb and flows and changes in practice patterns. But I think regardless, it's still a great field with a lot of innovation. So there's a lot of opportunities along one of those paths.
It's really interesting. I look at the movement towards private equity, whether it's solo practitioners or small group practices joining private equity. Usually the people who are the decision makers are towards the tail end of their career. At least that seems to be the case because they usually have the most to gain, right, financially. So they join private equity, maybe they forego salary or they take a large bonus and they work for, let's say, 3-5 years and then, they retire. And for them, I mean, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. Hey, that's great. You work so hard for most of your life, put in the hours, the blood, sweat, and the tears, and now here's a really nice, lucrative, and graceful way to exit. And I think it's more the younger doctors either coming straight out of training or who have only been in practice for a few years and maybe they're not partners yet, who feel like they're kind of getting the short end of the stick. You're in a position where you're still really young. You're in the prime of your career. You're not someone I see retiring for like another 20, 30 years. I think even when you're in your 70s, you're still going to be doing cataract surgery one day a week because you love it so much. You love your craft. And I've seen the move for us to private equity over the past several years pre-pandemic. What has that been like? What motivated those decisions? Because I actually feel like there's been a lot of benefits from that in terms of growth, expansion, and services that can be offered, being involved in clinical trials, having the latest up-to-date technology, that sort of stuff. I think your perspective is really interesting here because you're not someone who's going to retire in 3 years.
Right. And I think I tell people private equity is a solution for different problems within a practice, let's say. And so a traditional problem for, let's say, an older physician is sort of, what are they going to do when they go to pass that practice on to the next person? Is there a buyer for that? And I think private equity certainly was a solution for that problem. So that's one way of looking at a private equity, pathway. But there's other ways private equity can help, solve problems. So let's say for my path, the problem was we had grown where we'd started with one downtown location, literally 10 employees, 2 doctors, one, myself and an optometrist, and providing care. And we said, okay, let's grow that to 2 locations and 3. And then we ultimately grew it to, let's say, 10 locations within Northeast Ohio. What had happened is we had this growth path. We said, okay, if we continue on this path, let's continue to expand. We feel like we've got a great model, a great way to do cataract surgery or LASIK. We've got a great team. We want to continue on this path. But eventually, it's sort of the practice sort of outgrew myself and my partners what our expertise would be. Where we're great doctors, pretty good business people, but when you have one location, if you make a business mistake, you just work a little harder to make that up at the end of the year. When you have, let's say, 200 employees with 10 locations, and if you have some kind of misstep, let's say a billing error or a coding error that's going to hit your margin by 5%, that 5% became too much for any of us to absorb, where it could more or less sink the ship. And so at that point, to continue our path or continue our growth efforts and aspirations, the best avenue for us is to have this solution, and the solution being private equity, to bring in a few things. Number one, bring in expertise as far as running a large business, expertise as far as working with banking and capital, bringing in those resources to help to continue our growth efforts. Simple things, let's say, career paths for our strongest employees. I realize if our growth path, some people might say, well, Wiley, why do you guys still want to grow? You're big enough, you've done enough. Why do you continue wanting to grow? But we looked at sort of being sort of status quo. We saw that some of our best employees were going to move on. They had their aspirations. They wanted to kind of continue their career paths, and with a practice that has a ceiling, your best employees are ultimately going to move on and find work somewhere else. And so by having a continued growth opportunity within the practice provided by a private equity gave opportunities for our best employees to move up. Many of our employees have joined the private equity platform that's now serving a whole region from Illinois to Michigan to Ohio to West Virginia, Pennsylvania. Now we have people that are regional directors managing, let's say, marketing, or managing practice integration, or working as top level administrators, and these are people that really started on lower level aspects of the practice and moved their way up. So it gives sort of a trajectory for your employees, trajectory for your providers, allows more or less the docs to do what they do best, and allows me to continue being in the OR as much as I can. And it doesn't mean that I've totally pulled out of the business seat. It allows me to kind of pitch ideas in a boardroom, or pitch ideas to administrators, and allow true experts in what they do to excel the practice. So I think that private equity can definitely be a solution for growth, and it doesn't have to be the only solution for growth. There's many of practices that are out there that have the resources to continue their own growth plans, and I tell them, hey, if you're making it go by yourself, continue. But if you're struggling or stressing, or you don't want to take that second mortgage on your house to buy that next clinic, there are resources out there that can provide that and take the stress off. So I see it as a good solution for our field, and I think it's going to continue based on what I'm seeing now.
Fascinating to hear you talk about this, because I feel like most people, when they think of Bill Wiley, certainly patients, but even your colleagues, they think of brilliant surgeon, great clinician, innovator, always on the cutting edge, trying out the latest things, involved in industry, clinical trials, research. But then there's this whole other aspect to your life, at least professionally, let's say, that has very much been a small business owner and growing a practice, growing an organization, and now being involved with private equity. I would think that before even private equity, I'm trying to just think about how you even partition your time, because it takes so much focus and mental energy and time out of your day to just see patients and deliver great quality surgery, great quality outcomes. And now it's like after hours, you're dealing with the business, the logistics end of things, the professional, interpersonal aspects of being responsible for 200 employees and their families and being able to put food on their table. And now you're taking it to the next level, even where on top of just within your own group, now you're part of a large organization, you're having a say there. I would think that maybe some of the financial strain or issues or worries, or maybe with private equity, have been alleviated. But I would think now you're busier than you've ever been.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've kind of traded certain things, trading one thing for the other. And so, with when it was me and my partners running the practice, I can't tell you how many evenings we burned, sitting in a boardroom, making decisions, making, really hard decisions about, what healthcare insurance to provide for our patient, for our team, and sort of seeing, let's say, health insurance costs going up every year, 5-10%, and thinking, gosh, how can we afford this? If it goes up 10% next year, it's going to tip the scales. And, that decision versus, let's say, oh gosh, every little decision, the call center. Well, do we want to have automated call center or have somebody, physical people answering every phone call? Well, we want to have the best service, but what is the best service? And every little minute decision became, truly sort of make or break it seemed for us. And and we had our day jobs, seeing patients throughout the day, and then in the evenings we'd working through the business. And those were some of the most exciting times, but certainly without a doubt the most stressful times. I mean, even simple things like working with banking relationships, working through the credit crisis. You might not understand how that affected small businesses, but without a doubt, I always assumed if you're paying a mortgage on a note, if you're writing the check every month, that you're never going to get a call from the bank. But then we learned about things like technical default, and we're like, well, what's technical default? And technical default is when they reassess the value of your business and they say, you know what? We don't know if eye care is as profitable as it once was. And so that note that you had, I think we're just going to call it, and why don't you just pay it all back next month? And I'm thinking, well, if we could have paid it off, we would have paid it off. And how can we pay it off in one month? And it's kind of like if you owned a home and all of a sudden the loan to value ratio went upside down, and then the banker said, you know what, we just want you to pay that note off. And you're thinking, well, now if we're upside down, there's no way we can pay that off. And so, having, that type of banking pressure, it seemed like going through the credit crisis, if we wanted to buy a toothbrush for the practice, they were like, well, show us how that's going to make profit. And so, a lot of people say, well, it's private equity, all about the bottom line, and you're going to have that pressure. I'll be honest, we had those same pressures, with any traditional banking. To grow a practice, you're going to need some sort of banking relationship. It's very hard to just self-fund it. So you're going to have the local bank, and when times are good, the local bank is happy to give you those funds to buy the new laser, the new OCT, or whatever it is. But as soon as financial times change a little bit, those banks are under pressure. They have their bosses looking at what is the value of that business, how much has been loaned to that business, is their loan to value proper, just like owning a home. And so there's always those pressures. And so going from sort of completely privately owned to private equity, I see that there's always been that type of pressure, but at least now it's falling on somebody else's shoulders, not so much my own.
So how much of this had your dad figured out, and how much of this did you have to forge your own path and trial and error and A/B test?
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of that. I remember actually growing up, with hearing arguments about amongst my parents about financial things. Let's say when September 11th happened in 2001. LASIK basically just crashed overnight, and so my father built this huge multi-state LASIK business. Had multiple lasers on loan. He had mortgaged his home to buy these lasers. And then those banks came calling, and I remember he had to make some very tough decisions and very stressful times at home. And you see that on the front end. So being a small business owner in ophthalmology, it's not always rosy. There are sort of some ups and downs, and particularly if you're kind of pushing the limits, you're seeing an opportunity. Let's say you're seeing an opportunity that there's a new market emerging. Maybe it's multifocal lenses or light adjustable lens or SMILE. And you say, okay, well, I can buy the capital equipment to kind of take advantage of that. But if you miss gas or overshoot or overcommit, there can be some stressful times.
It sounds like there's a lot of, you make yourself very vulnerable.
Yeah.
There's a lot of liability and there's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm just trying to imagine myself as a resident or other residents potentially listening in on this, thinking, do I want to go into private practice? Do I want to just join a private equity group? Do I want to go into academics? In the latter two, maybe a lot of this is already taken care of. It's more of a clock in, clock out. You don't have to deal with the business, the administrative side of things, the stress about marketing and being responsible for patient reviews and that sort of stuff. In today's day and age, why do you think people should still go into private practice, and what's really been the most fulfilling aspect of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, and I tell people there's not necessarily a right or wrong, so you have to kind of find what is sort of an energy gainer. What do you wake up, itching to do, and or stay up past midnight working on, whatever it might be. And if you're staying up, burning the midnight, hours looking at sort of architectural plans to build a new clinic, or marketing efforts, or scouring Google and seeing how the Google clicks are working, okay, that's your passion. Or if you're staying up really late to write the research paper or the new book chapter or the article, which many of our colleagues do, that's what drives them, and they're passionate and they're motivated to do that. Then maybe that's more of an academic path. Or if you say, you know what, I love ophthalmology, I love walking into the clinic, seeing a patient, treating them. Man, when I'm home, I like riding my bike or surfing or whatever, where you have a more broad spectrum interest. At that point, owning your own practice may not be worth it for you. That extra stress for something that may not be your passion is probably not worth pursuing. So I tell people that, there's not necessarily right or wrong. Some people might say, oh, but if you own your own practice, maybe there's going to be more financial reward. Well, maybe, but maybe you're working twice as hard to gain it. And so, there's some value, to sort of, having other things, having time. And so there's that time value. And if you can, get home, be with your family, be the soccer coach for your kids, or, pursue a passion, on a weekend, it may be worthwhile to have somebody else kind of worrying about, the new clinic design or the new marketing effort or whatever it might be. So I don't necessarily say there's a right or wrong, but you just sort of pursue what you're interested in. And a lot of times it becomes just self-evident, where you find yourself doing. If you find yourself just always sort of pulling late hours at the clinic, working with the staff, putting out fires, working with the front desk, whatever it is, you're going to be kind of just pulled in, and that's where you'll be. Or if you find yourself when the clinic closes, you're out the door, leaving all that behind, letting somebody else deal with it. Well, chances are then someone else will deal with it, and so you can, chase whatever you're chasing.
You strike me very much as work hard, play hard.
Yeah.
And when you were here in the surgery center, you're in clinic. In clinic, you're seeing a lot of patients. When you're in the operating room, you're doing a lot of surgery. But then you also are very good about taking time off to be with your family, to be with your wife, in addition to traveling around the country, around the world, giving lectures, giving talks, giving back to the field, pushing our profession forward. Did you take any time off between residency and joining your dad?
I did not. And sort of, I could, in retrospect, it would have been awesome to, travel the world, go to Europe, do something like that. I remember pretty specifically, I was inclined to do that. I had a lot of my friends that were doing that, taking a gap year. And it would have been the perfect time. My dad was so itching to pass the torch. He had been burned out, like he's working so hard. He said, you know what? If you want to work for me, like my job starts July 1. I literally started July 1, right after residency. I remember I hopped in my car, packed up in Chicago, moved, and over the weekend, that next Monday, I was working and off and going. And so he said, you know what? If you work hard enough, there'll be time to take a vacation later. So and maybe 10 years later, there was time. So a lot of, I would say, I would generally advise that's a reasonable time to take the time off if you can. A lot of times that's not so practical. You have the job starting, you've got debt building. And so if you don't do it, then make sure you carve out time, every week to do something. I think I did my first 10 years, I probably let, other priorities slip. I hadn't, jogged a mile, or I hadn't done any exercise literally for a decade. And I remember, some of my friends, some of my friends in ophthalmology are like, hey, we're going to go on this trip. We're going to go, bike Mount Ventoux in France. Wiley, you should do it. And I was like, okay, I should probably get in shape. And I literally ran around the block, about puked. And I was probably 30 pounds overweight, totally out of shape. I was like, oh my gosh, where's the time gone? I used to be pretty good at athletics. I used to be able to bike, hike, or do all that stuff. And I said, you know what, I gotta make a change. And so, and I trained for that and got back into it. And then a couple of years later, did some triathlons with other friends, and now it's part of my daily routine to make sure that I do some sort of physical activity basically every day. And looking back, I think I should have done that earlier. I think I was lucky to get away with taking a decade off and then somehow getting back into it. But I think most people, you take that much time off, you just never get back into it. And I think that ultimately can work against you. And I think making sure that's a part of my daily routine has kind of given me, new life and new energy. Allows me to feel stronger in the OR, to have longer days, to have more energy to do what I really like doing. And so I feel like it's definitely been a worthwhile investment. It was one of those things I always would say. I tell my wife, I was like, oh, you should go run or you should go bike. I was like, oh, I don't have time. I've got to do this. I've got to work on the practice. I got to do whatever. And so I always had that excuse, I don't have time. But what I now realize, any hour that I do doing any physical activity, is I'm going to get 2 hours back of energy. And so whatever you're doing, you gain it back, and even more so. So that excuse is no longer valid. And so anybody listening, I would say definitely, make sure you're taking time for yourself. And if that's like, physical activity, or if it's chasing your careers or passions, one thing that's kind of, come back into my life. I remember in residency when I was in Chicago, I'd gotten into this sport called kite surfing. It was really early on. Me and my buddies bought kites off eBay, and it was this sort of really esoteric sport, and the equipment was really premature and new. And so, we were doing it in downtown Chicago. Really, thank God I didn't kill myself. But I look back at what we were doing. It was not smart. We had no training, no expertise. And so, and then I joined my father's practice. I put those kites and the equipment. It literally sat in my basement for 15 years. And then in the past sort of 5 years, some of my friends, I see some young residents that were in training talking about kite surfing. Like, oh, we're going kite surfing in Turkey or Portugal or whatever it might be. And I said, oh my gosh, I literally was doing that at your age, and it just disappeared. So I've made it a focus. I said, okay, I'm going to get back into that sport or do things that were truly my passions. I realized now I get to do it with my son, who's 13, and he's chasing it. So, anyways, I definitely recommend, don't put everything into your practice or your career. You've got to have a full balanced life. And so finding that kind of live hard, play hard balance is important. And, you can't have the excuses, I don't have time.
I always tell my friends, especially who say, I'll do it later, I don't have the time. I always say, even if you just do 20 minutes, something is usually, when it comes to physical fitness, always better than nothing. Totally. Unless you're only on 2 or 3 hours of sleep and you're trying to go run 5 miles and break your records, just getting the blood moving a little bit, getting some oxygenation going, it usually improves your mood, gives you energy, and then it's just good for you in the long term. And you're someone you're up pretty early and you work long hours, you work very hard when you work. Did you find that it was much easier just to start the day with that as opposed to trying to do that at the end of the day when you're exhausted?
Yeah, exactly. I found that waking up, let's say, so I used to wake up at, let's say, 6:15, 6:30 to get to the OR and start cases by 7:15. So now I've said, okay, if I can just wake up an hour earlier, my alarm goes off at 5, work out for an hour, and then start my day. It seems like that protocol for me really works well. So by the time, instead of just walking into the OR, sleepy and, kind of a little out of it and taking a little bit, to get going, now I come in, I'm full go, ready to do the day. And then in the evening when I'm home, I can be with my family, with them, so if I worked out after work, I might be taking away from family time at 5 a.m. Nobody else is up in the house. It allows me to have my time and do what I need to do. And then, when I'm home after work, I can, hang with the family.
So what's your routine? You get up at 5, is it always a morning jog, morning run?
Yeah. So it's either run, bike, could be Peloton, could be, some free weights, each day could be a little bit different, but trying to get some sort of aerobic with some kind of, weight, body weight or free weight training.
Yeah, I feel like it's really, really important, especially for someone who is as busy as you are, because most ophthalmologists, let's just call it like it is, are not doing the level of volume you're doing. They're not necessarily going to as many meetings as you're going to. So by virtue of that, they're not traveling as much. And I feel like constant travel is just it's very tricky to manage that and still stay healthy. And, I just think about, we just came back from ACOS.
Yeah.
I got up at like 3:30 to take a 5 a.m. flight out of Cleveland. I got to Deer Valley and I'd been up for so long and I was eating so many more calories and junk food than I usually would have in a normal day where I got a healthy amount of sleep.
Right.
Was able to stick, I didn't exercise once out there despite taking my athletic clothes, just because it's go, go, go when you're at these meetings.
Right.
And to be able to intersperse that daily habit, I feel like is really, really important.
Yeah.
Did you realize that when you were going to these meetings that you had to keep up with that, or was that a consequence of some sort of like health issues or anything you had?
Yeah, I think I probably started to realize that I wasn't as good at certain things. Let's say skiing, for example. It's always been a passion of mine, and you don't necessarily have to be in the best of shape to be pretty good at skiing, but at least when you're younger. But what I noticed is I started to get older, I was having injuries or getting hurt or just wasn't as good as I used to be. And I said, okay, I've got to now make a concerted effort to stay in better shape, full body, core, whatever it might be, to continue to do the activities that I enjoy or having fun doing. So it became more of a concerted effort. But I agree, sort of on the meeting aspect when you're on the road, that it can be quite challenging. You're on the road, you're having these amazing meals in these amazing locations, staying up late, and then have meetings early on in the morning, and so that can be hard to stay on track. Actually, a friend of ours, Nate Radcliffe, actually introduced me into this program that involves sort of an exercise philosophy that can be very mobile. It's using sort of resistant bands, jump ropes, in particular jump ropes, to be able to do quick workouts at high intensity, let's say within your hotel room. Even Nate would tell me, he's like, I'm not afraid. I'll pull out the jump rope in the middle of the airport terminal and just bang out 20 minutes. He's like, 20 minutes of jump rope can be done anywhere. And like literally he's waiting for a plane and doing jump rope to get a good workout in. I haven't quite gone to that extreme, but I can see, Nate, he had gone through a kind of a similar transformation. I think he had been working hard, like letting, his exercise slip, gained a few pounds. And then I swear between, let's say, Ascaris and AAO, I noticed he had like lost 20 or 30 pounds. I'm like, Nate, what are you doing? He's like, oh, here's my program. This is what you got to do. And it's, jump rope, resistant bands, and things like that. Getting introduced to that was truly like life-changing. It allowed me to have a program that I could do on the road that I didn't have to have the local gym to go to, because obviously it's not necessarily going to have that opportunity everywhere you're traveling.
Yeah, you're so right. Everyone thinks you have to go to the gym. You have to drive there. You have to mentally prepare for entering the gym. And then if you're by yourself and you don't have, let's say, a training buddy or partner to push you, you have to internally motivate yourself to commit to that work. Whereas for some people, it's just easier to just stay at home and do something, or just do calisthenics, or just use your body weight to provide some resistance. So truly, exercise is one of the things in life where it's like you don't need anything else apart from your physical human body. And as long as you're fortunate to be healthy enough and not debilitated, there's really no excuses for not being able to do it. But speaking of meetings, we were talking earlier today, we were debriefing ACOS. Yeah. You go to Ascaris, you go to AAO, Caribbean Eye, a million meetings, let's say, that you go to. We just came back and I feel like we were talking about, what was our favorite presentation? What did we hear that was really, really good? What do you feel like for medical students or residents, let's say, who are interested in speaking at the podium, or maybe haven't done a lot of public speaking before? What are like the elements that make a good presentation, or let's say that make it engaging?
Sure. Yeah. You know what? I'll say I was definitely a late bloomer in that. I see, Arjan, when you do a talk, I can already see, I'll give you my talk that I've polished in my mind, I've worked on for a year or two, and I give it to you, and like in one session, you're already delivering it better than I could do. So you're great at that. And I think I definitely will say that it took some work for me to have the confidence to present what I was passionate about. And I think that was one of the things I found is I did much better speaking about a subject that I had true passion on. So maybe it was a surgical technique that I was interested in versus, let's say, the newest glaucoma medication, molecule. Am I really passionate about that? Nah, not, at least for me, I was not so much. I might struggle with a talk like that versus if I'm going to talk about a surgical technique that we're trying to, pioneer or innovate. that might be easier for me to speak about. So I think if docs find what they're truly interested in, it becomes that much easier to present on it. I think knowing your audience, knowing the style of meeting, for example, ACOS might be very much case oriented, where you really have a room of 100 experts in the field that have something to say potentially about your case. And so if you steal the podium and don't share that opportunity, your talk's not going to resonate as much as sort of leaving some open-ended questions, letting the panel or the moderator chime in, or people from the audience to chime in. When you see that type of audience, you want to make sure you take advantage of it. Versus, let's say, if you're speaking at the, let's say, local community home, educating, retirees about cataract surgery, totally different audience. And so you have to come off more as the expert, and you are truly the expert in the room, and you want to, kind of maintain that podium presence. So I think understanding who you're talking to, what you're passionate about, what the setting is, and I think is important. I think other things around meetings, there are a lot of meetings. It seems like you could go to a different meeting literally every week of the year. And so understanding that there are different sort of cultures for the meetings, and understanding that if you're going to go to multiple meetings, try to mix it up with a different culture. So you have Academy, which is is huge, and it has its own culture, and a lot of people go to that for certain reasons. And then you have, say, ASCRS, which tends to be a little bit more focused on cataract refractive, and sort of a must-go meeting if you're in that space. And then you have some of the smaller meetings, let's say the boutique meetings like CareBNI, tends to be more of a meeting for higher volume practices that are truly often physician owned, where these docs are trying to get the information to run their practices to the next level. Either it's administrative reasons or surgical technique reasons. So that might be a great meeting to go to. Versus, let's say, ACO style meetings tend to be more sort of key opinion leaders trying to work with industry to share their thoughts and visions, and they're learning from each other, not necessarily teaching, let's say, the community doctor. It's more key opinion leaders teaching each other and industry to help kind of innovate products. So it has its own sort of culture or flavor. And so you may not necessarily always want to go to all ACOS or all CareBNI or all ASCRS type meetings. You want to mix that up and understand that each meeting is going to have its own culture that you're going to learn from.
I think most residents in their second or third year, usually the program will provide some stipend to go to one meeting, or especially if they present, to go to that. But then sometimes it feels more like an obligation for some residents. Some people are like us, we're passionate about going, interacting, continuing to grow and learn and share and contribute to discussions and help push our field forward. But what do you feel like are the main benefits for let's say, someone who doesn't regularly go to meetings? Like, why is it important, let's say 5 years out, if you're in private practice, to go and engage with colleagues and peers and try and stay up to date with stuff?
Yeah, I think the best part about meetings, personally, is just the interaction with the other people attending. And you can probably get most of the content online from an educational standpoint, and that's fine, I think. Or you could probably consume it quicker via reading it in print or whatever it might be. But it's really hard to beat that social interaction and looking somebody eye to eye and say, okay, tell me, does this new technique work really? Does this new light adjustable lens, does it really work? And how's it working in your practice? And, really drilling down and determining, what's important to you. And so what's nice is our field's so small, at any of these meetings, you can seek out the, often world experts about a certain topic or technique and have, 5 minutes, eye to eye and sit down and try to figure out how to bring that expertise into your own practice. So thankfully, we're, ophthalmology, I think, is unique in that it is relatively small community that we tend to know each other and tend to be open-minded and, share our ideas and thoughts and trying to lift everybody up. So I think it's hard to beat that type of interaction. In the past 10 years, the pace of innovation has been so fast. If you're not constantly staying up to date, it's easy to fall behind. And I think having that live meeting experience allows you to network with your colleagues and keep you, up to date.
Yeah, the best part about going to meetings for me was, for me personally, feeling like I'd found my ophthalmology family, meeting like-minded individuals from other states, maybe even different aspects of anterior segment surgery, who want to contribute to the field, push it forward, passionate about their care. And everyone sort of shares similar personality characteristics, whether that's communication skills, wanting to give back, teaching, being involved with research. And I felt like I didn't necessarily find that family per se when I was going through, medical school or residency training, but it was these meetings that attracted people who had the similar interests that led to these connections. And now I'm texting these individuals literally every day of the week.
Yeah.
And it's great because even though we're friends, and we're not even in competition with each other because we're totally scattered across the country, we're still pushing each other to sort of be the best version of ourselves we can be, whether that's in surgery or whatever aspect of ophthalmology it is we're passionate about. And I never would have met any of these people probably if I hadn't just gone to meetings with the idea of being open-minded and wanting to learn. I had that experience. My first ophthalmology meeting I went to, I think I was an intern, academy. Yeah. And you've talked to me about how really when you joined your dad and when you bought his practice, you didn't really go to meetings for almost a decade.
Yeah.
What prompted that sort of shift in deciding you wanted to engage with colleagues and industry and start going?
Sure. I think one of the main there's a couple of driving factors of that. One of them was I realized I was thrown into this high volume practice and had immediate experience in, let's say, LASIK or PRK, some of the early innovation cycles for some of these technologies, and felt like I had a pretty good grasp on what was going on. I remember a couple of the meetings I'd go to and I'd see some quote experts talking about it, but maybe they'd only done 2 or 3 of the procedures. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just did 30 last week. And no, that's not what they're not talking about this or talking about that. And I felt, gosh, I should say something. I should, put my voice out there that some of the early innovation we were involved in, we weren't necessarily sharing our thoughts or concepts. I felt obligated to kind of push back and put our knowledge base out there. So that was one of the driving factors. The other one was I would also see at some of these meetings where, the doctor's talking about this new laser, this new lens, and this new technique. I'm like, gosh, how do I get access to that technology? I realized the best way to gain access to that was to be involved in some of the early research or clinical trials. And so I said, okay, well, gosh, I want to be involved with trials. And I said, okay, well, to be involved, we want to have doctors that are going to go out there, work on it, present their findings at the next meeting. I said, okay, well, gosh, okay, so that's the path to be involved in that innovation cycle, is to sort of, put yourself into that circuit, develop, research protocols, develop investigator-initiated trials, put that knowledge base out there, collaborate or partner with industry. And then it was self-feeding and allowing us to kind of stay on that forefront. So it was mostly sort of this, desire to stay on that leading edge and stay up to date with the newest technology and have a hand in sort of the development and guide sort of some of those products in their early stages.
How easy was it when you made that decision to get involved in the discussion? Because I look at meetings now, I can talk to anyone at a meeting and I say Bill Wiley, and they go, oh yeah, Bill Wiley. He's, he just presented inverted implantation of an IOL, and people just implicitly understand, oh man, Bill Wiley, always trying out, new things, trying to innovate and improve outcomes. But I would imagine, rewind time back to when you're 30, 35 and just realizing like, hey, I actually have a lot of experience. And some of these people, they don't really know what they're talking about. How easy was it to get involved with that discussion? Because I think a lot of young ophthalmologists who want to give back, who want to contribute, who want to be a part of the community that's growing things, they often wonder, how do I get a seat at the table? Or how easy was that for you?
I feel like if you're willing to do the work to gather, let's say, the data and present your findings, it's one of the easiest way to get your foot in the door. That it seems like every few months there's a new product launch. Let's say Vuity, for example. Allergan is starving for data on Vuity. And if you're a young ophthalmologist that has used Vuity and even, let's say, 10 patients, okay, well, how did they do? What was their response? How are they seeing distance, intermediate, and near in a true clinical practice? How were they post-LASIK patients or the cataract patients, or were using it on-label or off-label? There's so many questions that need to be answered with a product like that. And there's so much opportunity to simply just gather the data and present it, submit a presentation at, let's say, ASCRS or Academy or any, CareBNI or ACOS, any one of those meetings would be happy to have that data presented. And then what will happen is Allergan will take notice. They're like, oh my gosh, look at, Arjan just presented this data. Looks very interesting. You know what? The next time we have, a booth at Academy, we'd love for him to present his, findings at the booth. And then you do a booth talk and people realize or take note. And then they say, okay, well, you know what? There's going to be a meeting in, ACOS, and we'd love to support you to present your findings there. They might sponsor you to go out to that meeting or whatever it might be, or the next new drop that they're working on. Their research department's like, well, he did such a great job in that VUITY IIT or even that just self-funded study that we should support their research department or research efforts to go to that next level. So it starts with more or less sharing your clinical findings and thoughts, and then that sort of snowballs, and there's plenty of opportunity. I think just to sort of say, well, I just want to be invited to speak because I think I know a lot about it. Yeah, that might be hard to do. But if you gather the data, put it out there, I think that's when you start to get those opportunities. Yeah.
The way I look at it, it's kind of a spectrum, whether you want to call it being engaged with industry or being engaged with clinical research. There's sort of the R&D, the research aspect of things, and some people are really involved in conducting, executed, conceiving, investigator-initiated trials or working on IRBs. And then there's some people who don't really want to spend their time on that, but they want to either just talk about their experiences or just, let's say, just talk in general.
Yeah.
And then there's, I think, a healthy balance where people sort of straddle the middle line and they enjoy doing research, they conduct IITs, and then they go to the podium and they talk about it. And so, communication skills aside, trying to be a good presenter, give an engaging presentation so people actually want to listen. What you were just discussing is more the data collection and the analysis aspect of things.
Right.
Was that something your dad was doing before you joined him? Were you naturally wanting to collect outcomes? Or are you tracking these things internally to make internal improvements?
Yeah, a little bit of all those things. I think, our practice, my father did have a fair amount of experience in some of the early lenses and was constantly trying to track his data. For example, he was using Nidec laser and the Vizix laser. At the time, the Nidec laser was less expensive to operate, and so he wanted to make sure, were his results with the Nidec as good as the Vizix? So he wanted to internally track that, say, oh yeah, they're as good or maybe better. And so at that point, it paid off for him to then feel confident to reinvest in that technology. But also at the same time, Nidec would say, okay, well, gosh, Bob Wiley has this data. Let's sponsor him to present it at this meeting or whatever it might be. So we did have a bit of a culture for tracking results and within the practice. And once you have that system, just for your self edification to make sure you're providing the best possible care, if you have that culture of tracking the data, then you can use that not only for your practice but also to help industry or your colleagues understand what's really happening there.
So Bill Wiley in his 30s decides, hey, I want to get involved. I want to be a part of the discussion. He has a thriving practice. He's doing a lot of high volume, and then he's going and presenting at these meetings. What was the reception like? Did you feel like you got accepted pretty quickly? Did it take time? You're good friends and best friends and buddies with so many of similar type of people, similar types of personalities and minds in our field. How quickly did you guys connect based off that similar energy, or was it really a prolonged process?
I would say it was sort of maybe a slow and steady process. It wasn't necessarily overnight, but it didn't take so long. I think though along those paths that maybe things that helped, continue with the opportunities is trying to maintain credibility. And as much as obviously we all want to be credible, but it's easy to kind of get bought into wanting to say something nice about a technology, but maybe it doesn't really deserve it. Or maybe you want to say something bad about a competing technology, but maybe it doesn't really deserve that. So you can either sort of be in a position to oversell something or sort of downplay something. And even though it might not be your conscious intent, I think it's a little bit of human nature to sort of want to, you sort of want to please whoever you're working with or whoever you're friends with or partnering with. And so the problem with that, though, is if you overplay those cards, you start to lose credibility. And then, the audience is sort of like, okay, well, Wiley always likes this brand. No matter what that brand does, he's always saying positive things. Maybe we don't believe him so much on that. Or Wiley always is saying negative things about this brand. He's never been a fan of them. Is it really justified? And so I think, trying to pull that out of your mind and just trying to find the truth, even though we always are trying to do it, just trying to pull out those internal biases that eventually happen. Particularly, let's say, if somebody's sponsoring you to go on a trip to talk about a product, it's hard not to say good things about that. But if you overplay that, you can sort of lose credibility. So those are some of the things sort of navigating that road properly. Thankfully, my partners and I were able to do that, I think, in a relatively good job. Other things that put us on an early track, I think, were finding technologies that weren't as popular and finding where they might apply within a field. For example, one of our early partnerships was WaveTech, or now it's called Aura. At the time, it was called Orange, and it's intraoperative aberrometry to try to get better results. And initially, it was pretty challenging to really work with that technology. It was slow, cumbersome. We didn't really understand all the variables that were involved. And so a lot of people had sort of discounted the technology and said, it doesn't work. And but we were able to kind of work through a lot of the kinks, a lot of the early developments, early nomograms, gather a lot of data. And so as most doctors had kind of already turned away and poo-pooed it, there was a select few of us that were able to work through and determine how it could be useful. And I think those leaders of that company that ended up working with other innovative companies remembered how we did it with that technology and went to call on us and say, hey, we're working through a new product. We've got this new technology. Can you help us work through the kinks? You are integral in that process with Orange or Aura, and help get them through that. And so, if you find a technology that everybody likes, chances are you may get lost in the shuffle because some big names may be already on that technology and already working through it. But there's so many technologies that are at an early stage that need sort of a champion or a pioneer to push them forward. It takes time, energy, and passion. That's the type of thing that we'd be working late night, past midnight, working through the data, crunching the data, calling the guys in California, when it's East Coast time zone, past my bedtime, and calling those guys, and even past their bedtime, they're like, all right, Wiley's calling again. Like, does the guy ever stop? It's like, but they appreciated working through some of those kinks to kind of push the technology to that next level.
So let's say you have an eye, or you have a mind keen for innovation and wanting to work with new technologies. The big companies are established. Everyone kind of knows what they are, and especially look at the speaking circuit and these KOLs, if you want to call them that, who continually speak for these companies. Let's say you can't go down that road, or you don't want to go down that road. How do you go about feeling out what small startups have potential? How do you even go about interacting with representatives from those companies?
Yeah, I think the smaller startups, I think if you seek them out at, let's say, Academy or ICRS, they're going to have the smaller booths. I talked to Rob Weinstock about his early days, and one of the great stories is when he was walking. It was like a Sunday morning, probably after late night, Saturday night, just walking through, and I would do the same thing. We'd walk through the back booths, like the smaller ones that were more just card tables with like a little black cloth and really nothing fancy. You'd have obviously Alcon and Zeiss, are these huge mega $1 million booths, but you'd go to the back of the convention hall, find these small little booths, and he said he was walking by and he saw this TV, and he said it just annoyed him. He's like, the TV is blurry, and he walked by. He's like, you know what? I should go back and talk to them and just tell them to put that the microscope's a little out of focus. So he went back. He's like, hey, your scope's out of focus. You better focus it up. And like, oh no, it's 3D. Put these glasses on. So he puts the glasses on, and all of a sudden he sees the eye in 3D on the TV screen. He's like, oh my gosh. He's like, you might have something here. And and at that time, the CEO was in the booth, and all these startups, the CEO is going to be manning the booth, or key individuals are going to be manning the booth, and they're starving to talk to any doctor. So Rob said, sparked up a conversation. He's like, I think I could do cataract surgery on this. I think they were using it just for maybe teaching purposes, just recording. They weren't necessarily doing it for heads up reasons. I think Rob had maybe a sore back or wanted to have better ergonomics in the back in the operating room, and so he kind of worked with that company. Back then, literally the way it worked is you have a big screen with 2 rear projectors, and those rear projectors had to kind of line up perfectly to put this the 3D image on the screen. If any of the projectors are a little bit off, you'd literally get nauseous trying to operate with it. And somehow Rob worked through that technology and got them from more or less very much a gimmicky kind of technology to something that's truly life-changing and career-changing. As you know, right now, all we operate in is heads up in our ORs. I haven't operated through a regular scope in literally 5 years. I feel like it's given my career new blood. My back is never sore. I can teach better. I have a fellowship and all those things. So, a classic example of a doctor walking through sort of the back halls of the academy, finding a small startup, seeing an opportunity and working through that opportunity when more or less everybody else was like discounting, myself included. I'm like, there's no way that's going to work. I actually felt bad. I'm like, I can't believe Rob's chasing this 3D thing. No one's going to want to do that. So anyways, it's just sort of a good example of working and finding a startup that's starving for that champion.
So I think what you're describing sounds simple enough. If you're in practice and you want to get involved and maybe work with industry or see what's up and coming, take a week off work, take vacation, go to one of the bigger meetings and just talk to people, get involved. It's almost impossible not to meet fantastic people in our field.
Right.
But let's go back now to the surgical and clinical aspects of this. In today's day and age, if you want to get a jump start, you want to get a head start and accelerate the learning curve for cataract surgery, for refractive surgery, for any subspecialty, really, there's fellowships. There's targeted fellowships designed for that. And there's the traditional academic fellowships, and there's private practice fellowships. And private practice fellowships tend to be more high volume. They tend to be far more direct, one-on-one type, traditional preceptorship type trainings. And they also involve a lot of these aspects of learning the administrative side of things, the business side of things, and a fellowship like the one you have, widely considered the best in the country for refractive and cataract surgery. You get to work with industry. You get to work with the latest cutting-edge technology. You get to learn from a master surgeon like yourself, like Shamik Bafna. But when you were coming out of residency, those opportunities, those fellowships didn't exist. You could do an associateship maybe, and hopefully if you found the right person who was an amazing surgeon, a great teacher, really cared about sacrificing time out of their schedule to invest in you, to teach you, I mean, that opportunity is, really rare. So when you were coming out of training and going straight into working with your dad, how did you go about cultivating your skill set? Because I'm sure as amazing as your dad is and was when he was practicing in his career, there were still other skills you had to learn either on your own, or did you travel? Did you go to other places? How did you do that?
Yeah, good question. I think in some regards, things seemed simpler back then. It looks like with cataract surgery, we basically just had cataract surgery. We didn't have, multifocal or femto or our guidance. There was no premium IOL options. It was basically cataract surgery. We're all just trying to do, as good a job with a basic cataract surgery as you could do. You might use viscoat to protect a cornea. Okay, that was an innovation or whatever it might be. So cataract surgery, in a way, was more straightforward, I suppose, then. Refractive surgery basically had LASIK, and that was it, LASIK and PRK. And so things were a little bit, more straightforward. But then over the years, I look back and see what type of innovations we've had. We've had multifocal lenses, femtosecond LASIK, femtosecond cataract surgery, SMILE, ICL, cross-linking Intacs, conductive keratoplasty, all these different refractive or corneal refractive techniques that have come out. But thankfully for me, it was learned maybe every year or two, there was going to be a new innovation. So it slowly innovated. Now, even with that, some of those innovations seem daunting, and the way we would learn them is, travel internationally overseas. So I've traveled multiple places. I went to China to learn LASIK with my father early on. Went to Mexico to learn implantable contact lens with Steve Slade. Went to Dominican Republic to use femtosecond cataract surgery with Juan Baye. Early on in residency, I was with Fedorov in Russia doing radiokeratotomy techniques. I was actually a med student, so I wasn't necessarily physically doing it, but certainly observing and learning that way. I'm trying to think. Went to Peru to learn the LENSAR laser. So a lot of times, almost any new technology, before it hits the U.S., it's going to be in some sort of international, country where it's being innovated. Most of the MIGs, same thing. A lot of the MIGs are done Eastern Europe. I actually went to Costa Rica to learn Hydrus MIGs, and so having that international experience gives you that sort of leg up, and some comfort or confidence to sort of look your patient in the eye and understand they're not necessarily going to be the first that you've done this procedure on, that you've had some clinical experience before you've provided it to your patients here in the U.S. So I think for me, that was definitely very critical in allowing me to learn and sort of at that pace and stay on that leading edge.
It's funny, you're relaying this, and I'm remembering something. I remember in a conversation with Bob Osher, he told me that when he was a resident, almost every weekend he was traveling around the country, visiting some colleagues, going to operating rooms, just trying to see, he heard a cool technique. You had back then, there was no such thing as YouTube or Instagram videos or TikTok or Snapchat. You had to go and travel somewhere and meet someone, and maybe you're communicating through snail mail and arranging these times to meet. That even today, though, with as much as social media and the internet has facilitated connection at the blink of an eye in an instant, you still have to do it. It's one thing to talk about how cool or interesting that might be, but then to actually take time out of your schedule, make arrangements in your life to go visit someone else. You're not going to be operating. You're just going to be observing. Maybe you've never met them before. Maybe it's in a different country, different culture, different language. That takes a lot of initiative, but it also takes a lot of intrinsic motivation to improve and to grow. And the barriers to that, I feel like, are large enough that the majority of ophthalmologists, or maybe let's say just majority of people in life, wouldn't do that. What was it? I mean, you're talking about a burning fire, a passion to become better at refractive surgery, cataract surgery, and before it's available in the U.S., you're traveling all around the world. You're working with their innovators in those other countries so that you can sort of understand things as they're coming to us. Was it your father who instilled that in you, or is it just like because you love ophthalmology and what you do so much?
Yeah, he was a huge fan of traveling and seeing what the next person was doing. It's interesting. He showed me some of his early correspondence. He went down to see Chuck Williamson, Blake Williamson's father, to learn radiokeratotomy, and he had his radiokeratotomy book that described all the places he had gone to learn. He talked about K-Spear, Bear Care, some other, internationally and nationally, where he learned these techniques. Chuck Williamson was mentioned that, which is amazing because he's still working strong, a pioneer down in Baton Rouge. So, but seeing his passion for travel to gain that knowledge, I think instilled upon me that desire. And like I was discussing before, ophthalmology is a smaller field, and what's neat about ophthalmology, you do have that opportunity to send an email to a world expert and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be in XYZ country. I'd love to see you operate. I'd love to see your clinic. Can I swing by? And most ophthalmologists, I say, yeah, sure. I look back, when I went to see Fedorov in Russia, that was snail mail before email, and we actually faxed back and forth. I said, faxed a letter and described who I was and say, I'd love to come to Russia for a month and learn from you. And he helped arrange it, and we made it happen. He was literally the father of radiokeratotomy, and welcomed me to his OR. So you see that time and time again. A lot of our colleagues that are on that forefront have that same philosophy. I know. I talked to Blake Williamson, and he talked about before he started practice. He called it his road trip. We went down south and went through Florida, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, and he named these, Oklahoma. He named some of the surgeons that I've heard of that are top in their field. And he said, I spent a day or two with each of these surgeons. I wanted to see how they ran their clinic. How did they do their surgery? How are they at the top of their career? And and number one, you have to look at it and see it and observe it, but you have to internalize that and realize how do you apply it to what you're going to be doing in the future, and that can be a whole art in and of itself.
Yeah, it's amazing because we're so isolated in our training environment.
Yeah.
When you're in residency, you might have a lot of different attendings, but they're your only attendings. And now, I mean, things are different with YouTube, and you can go online and watch any surgical video from around the world and hear great lectures for free from the academy meetings.
Right.
But when you're in the trenches or you're being staffed by an attending, it's pretty much their way or the highway, unless they let you experiment or try new things out. And what I found really interesting was when I was on the fellowship interview trail, it was in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So all the academic institutions said, we're not doing in-person interviews. So they were just virtual interviews. It's kind of hard to gauge a sense of people if you're not in person and sensing their energy or seeing the facilities, seeing how the current fellows are going about their day-to-day tasks and duties. But all the private practice fellowships either mandated, if you want to be considered, to do an in-person interview, or they were open to it and encouraged it if the virtual interview went well. So I found myself conveniently on my pediatrics rotation as a PGY4 ophthalmology resident in my chief year, going on a lot of these in-person interviews for these private practice cataract and refractive fellowships. And one of the amazing benefits of that was just seeing how these different surgeons in these high volume settings did something as simple as making a capsulorhexis or making incisions so differently. And I was getting all these pearls and seeing all these things that I never saw in person in residency when I was operating, because my attendings were used to doing things a certain way. They felt comfortable doing things a different way. So seeing that diversity in surgical technique, clinical acumen, but then also just seeing how practices were run in different settings. And it was really fascinating during the pandemic, seeing how each of these practices responded differently to the pandemic. So there's nothing that has broadened my perspective more than in ophthalmology than visiting other practices, visiting other institutions, communicating with people outside of maybe your regular sphere, your circle, because there's so many ways to skin a cat. There's so many ways to do every single step of cataract surgery. And the beautiful thing about our field is everyone's usually trying to come up with a better way to do something or a more efficient way to deliver better outcomes. And for me personally, traveling and visiting other surgeons has been a massive boon myself as growth as a clinician and as a surgeon. You say your dad loved to travel. Remind me, was he the one who founded the Caribbean Eye meeting? Yeah,
so more or less, he was one of the founders. The way it worked actually is he had started this meeting called the Islands meeting that ultimately then merged with ACE's meeting called the Caribbean Eye. But before, what sparked the Island meeting was we went on a family vacation. It was me as a kid. I was probably 4 or 5 years old with my dad and my dad's best friend, Bruce Hess, is an ophthalmologist from Residency from Geisinger, and they said, you know what, let's just go on a family vacation. I knew the Hess kids; they're good friends of mine, and as a kid, and so we went on this group family vacation, and it turns out all the dads did is talk ophthalmology the whole time. They're like, you know what, next year we should bring this guy, and he'd love this, and we'll talk about this. And so it went from like 2 people to 3 people to 10 people to then 20 to 50, and so each year it got a little bit bigger. So it was started off of this idea of, you know what, from Ohio in March around spring break, it was always around our spring break, we'd go to some great island, St. Thomas or St. Croix or Jamaica or Barbados or whatever it might be, and visit a new island. And he would more or less pick and choose a group of docs that were all his colleagues that were kind of on that leading edge of private practice, and ultimately kind of came to what we call a Caribbean Eye now. And it still has a lot of that same flavor, kind of a family friendly meeting with leading ophthalmologists running large private practices that want to kind of go to that next level or continue to stay on that leading edge.
So was that part of the deal when you took over the practice, was inheriting the responsibilities of running the meeting?
Yeah, that's right. It's funny you say that. Actually, even that, when I first came out, I felt like too busy. I was like, I can't afford to go to any meetings. Like the first year, I sort of just hunkered down. In retrospect, I should have been more involved. And I looked at the Caribbean Eye at that time had gone a little bit old school. And at the time, it was all my dad and his colleagues. I'm like, oh, they're kind of older docs, a little bit washed up. became more of a social thing for them. I feel like it kind of ebbed and flowed. And then actually Jim Loden, a friend of mine now, his dad was an eye doc as well. And Jim Loden got involved with Care BNI and sort of reinvigorated it with the young doctors. He brought in like Toby Tyson and a number of other, docs that were sort of a new generation of, leaders, a lot of them second generation docs that kind of reinvigorated Care BNI to kind of get it back on track. So I kind of attribute Jim Loden's efforts, reestablishing it. And then he pulled me back in. He said, "Hey, Wiley, I know you used to go with your dad. Why don't you come check it out again?" And so I reengaged, and now one of the program director run it with Rob Weinstock, and it's been a blast being involved with it all these years.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going to Cabo next year. That's gonna be a ton of fun. Hopefully, it doesn't rain the whole time like it did this year in Puerto Rico. You mentioned the old school generation. Yeah, I was at ACOS, and I can't remember who I had this conversation with, but they were essentially saying that. I don't know if it's political correctness, but in today's day and age, people go up on the podium, they give a presentation, and everyone says, "Oh, that was great, you were the best," and you get a lot of applause. And back in the day, it was not uncommon if you went up and presented to be on the spot, directly challenged. To like, if someone didn't agree with you, they would call bullshit on the spot, and there was maybe not a lot of this positivity and warmth and friendliness and niceness, and it was a little bit more cutthroat. Were you ever in that world? Did you ever see that firsthand?
You know what? I never really, thankfully, haven't been challenged that much on podium. I think I sort of navigated I guess, more friendly times. I think there's been a few times that's come up, and it's interesting when it does. You tend to remember it, and you remember forever who challenged you. And then sometimes now I find myself as being one of those doctors that sometimes challenges the young doc. I feel like I'm this mid-career, and seeing the younger guys come out and presenting something, and it is interesting. Somebody might present something that touches a nerve. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not quite right. Now I find myself chiming into the microphone and maybe trying to challenge them on the spot. And I think back, I'm like, maybe I should have just bit my tongue. I don't know. So anyways, I guess, but with all that being said, I think if you can do it in a tactful way, with respect, I think it makes those live meetings more interesting. I think, to me as an observer, there's nothing better seeing a little bit of controversy and seeing a little bit back and forth. And I guess what I can always respect is when there's two individuals that have passion for the field. They might have passion in different ways or might have conflicting thoughts, but you always have to respect that they're at least raising their hand, putting their thoughts forward. You might disagree with it, but you can at least respect their passion for sharing their thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely entertaining, and I don't know if it's like the side of me that enjoys like seeing trolling in real time, or when there's controversy or bickering or arguments. It's definitely, if it's an otherwise sort of boring meeting, it certainly makes it a little bit more exciting. But I think at the end of the day, it's people, again, like you said, who are passionate about something, or they have clinical experience in something, and now they're having a debate. Well, that's when you have a conversation, that's how you elicit what's right and wrong, what works, what doesn't work. And that's how you learn ultimately, and then push things forward. So, I do think it's interesting. It is kind of boring, those meetings where people just go up and talk, and then there's no discussion afterwards. And it's like, now you're 10 talks in, and it's just like you're ready to get out of there and go to lunch. And the meeting runs from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Yeah. Maybe you've heard all these talks before at other meetings. And I find the best ones are when presentations are short, concise. Maybe it's a little bit higher level, targeted to whatever the audience is. And then there's people who either don't have any experience with that technology or surgery, and then there's people who do have, and there's people maybe who don't like it, and they all kind of weigh in and give their different perspectives. I think that's the benefit of going to the conferences, especially if they're non-CME, right? Because that's when you can have candid conversations, and that's when really the real experiences come out. And sometimes learning remember we were at, I think, what was the meeting we were at? New Orleans. Yeah. It was you, me, Rob Weinstock, Blake Williamson, and there was a conversation around certain IOLs. Yeah. And Rob turned to Blake and said, that was worth the price, like in the time of coming here to this meeting, just to hear your little pearl about what your experience has been in the practice, Great point. So it's things like that, where even if you can just take away something like that, you talked about how some little inefficiency or misstep in a large practice can really affect things. That sort of goes back to that concept we were talking about, high volume, revealing all. Right. Gaining one little pearl like that, I feel like can make such a world of a difference.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So at our practice here at Clear Choice, we have a lot of staff that have been with the practice for a long time. And it's sort of different in the sense that, you look at maybe an outpatient surgery center, or you look at an eye clinic, and, there's people who've worked there a long time, but sometimes people come and go. The people we have at Clear Choice are really just passionate about what they do. And we have some really just very unique individuals who are essentially unparalleled in their experience with what they do. So, for example, Jeff Augustine has a refractive OD. I can't think of anyone really like him in the country who's had the experience he's had, from the early days in refractive surgery with your dad all the way through now. He's seen everything predating RK, and now, if you consider Evo ICL or Smile as sort of the forefront of refractive surgery, he's been in that process from the very beginning. So when you talk to someone like him, or when he shares his experiences, he speaks with a lot of sort of knowledge and wisdom. You look at someone like Brian Huda, right, who's our laser boss, our master laser technician. How many people are there in the country who are actively involved at a high volume, cutting edge laser vision correction center, and they also understand how to take apart the lasers and put them back together? You see someone like Jackie, who's sort of our head surgery counselor, and sort of the experience she's had throughout her lifetime in her career, and being able to deliver that sort of high touch experience to patients. These people who come in and they're so passionate about what they do, and they're gravitating towards you and your practice and everything you've built. What is it that draws them there, and how did you sort of meet these individuals or join them sort of in refractive surgery?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of it is building a culture, around sort of, everybody having the same interest in trying to deliver that best possible outcome. And in a practice like ours, we're sort of trying to push the limits as far as new technology, new techniques, better care, better customer experience. You need a team that all has those same interests. And I think it's sort of self-limiting. The people that enjoy that and want to be part of the team are going to stay in, as long as they can. And the people that maybe aren't quite as interested, will move on and find something else that they're passionate for. But, I look at some of the hours we run at Clear Choice, and, we're often working evenings, working Saturdays, working Sundays, and more or less, why are we doing that? Well, that's when the patients want to be seen or have the opportunity to be seen. Literally, we did, when flex bending was popular, we did a laser shoot, and a lot of our patients, what we noticed were for flex bending, would put one eye and, let's say, 1 year, and wait for the new year and do the other eye the next year, and they could thus straddle the year with flex bending and make sure they maximized it. So we started thinking, we're like, well, maybe if we did surgery around midnight on New Year's Eve, we can do some eyes and the 1 year, and then wait till after midnight and do the other eyes after that. And so I was actually out of town, but I said, Shamak, would you be up for that? And Shamak's like, yeah, I'll do surgery. So Shamak did midnight surgery. They did it instead of Valium, I think, passed out champagne. And we had a team of technicians, laser techs, front desk, that were all passionate. They were like, yeah, we're doing New Year's surgery for our flex bending patients. So we had 10 patients that did one eye 1 year and one eye the next year around midnight. And so, not everywhere you're not going to find those type of employees to always be doing that type of service. So, it's sort of self-limiting. I guess, that passion was kind of contagious and attracted the right individuals.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. By the way, I'd never heard that story before. Yeah. But I think it's like, like attracts like.
Yeah.
Iron sharpens iron.
Right.
The best tend to eventually find the best, and then they push each other and they get better. There's a lot of things that we've touched on: getting involved with new technology, trying it out, research. I do want to talk to you about integrating new technology, building a research department, how you did that. But you can't really do any of that if you have average outcomes, mediocre outcomes. You're an amazing surgeon. You're probably the best surgeon I've ever had the honor and privilege of working with, or even witnessing.
Thank you.
How did you become so good? Do you feel like surgery was something you had a natural knack for? Is it something that took many years of repetition and being conscientious and trying to be a better version of yourself?
I think, without a doubt, it's a learned skill, and so, I don't think it's something that you can necessarily be born with. I think you definitely can work towards it, but without a doubt, I had a lot of help getting there. I think having good mentors that give you the confidence. I look back in residency, and by no means was I a great surgeon, but my mentors had total confidence, or at least portrayed that to me, to allow me to sit down and feel like, okay, I can do this. So I think having proper mentors that can give you that confidence, so you can sit there at the table and perform to your best. You may not be great yet, but at least you'll perform to your personal best. I think that, good mentorship, instilling confidence, coupled with sort of a desire to always get better, and that starts with analyzing each case. So in residency, each surgery we would record. Back then it was on VHS, and we'd record the VHS tape and review each tape time and time again, each step. And I would look and say, okay, well, how could this be better? How could that step be better? And thankfully, my father loved reviewing those tapes with me. I'd come home for Thanksgiving, bring the tapes. We'd sit down over the weekend, review each tape. So each surgery, so even maybe I'm only doing 150 surgeries in residency. If you watch each case 2 or 3 times, now you've increased your surgical experience 3 or 4-fold, even more so, because then you start to realize where you've made the faults or made mistakes, and then improve upon them. And so, a lot of times the challenging cases, and particularly in residency, you never want to look at it again. You look at that tape, and you'd only really, like a lot of people, you only really want to look how great this case was, and you review that. But you have to force yourself to look at the cases that went sour, and they're painful to look at, but you can really learn. That's where you learn it. By recording every case, you get a chance to catch those opportunities and understand, okay, I won't do that again, or when this happens, make sure you're prepared, or whatever it might be. So I strongly encourage recording and reviewing surgical outcomes. And then also what you find, once you are doing that, you start to learn that you can then be a much better observer when, let's say, at the meetings or on iTube and watching other people's techniques. Having viewed your own so many times, you start to see nuances that other people, what they're doing to make their cases better. Throwing that now in the age of 3D and 3D surgery, you can step that up, and where if you're recording cases in 3D, literally the playback is the same view that you had when you were doing the case at the time. It's the exact same view. And so you're truly immersed in what was happening and can see every little nuance and understand what's going on. So I think, having good mentors, good observers, and then sort of the diligence to replay and redo, I think that combination can definitely push surgical skills forward.
Yeah, I feel like what you said is so true, because I recorded every single case. So Bob Osher was one of my first mentors in ophthalmology, and still a dear friend and great mentor. It's something he instilled in us from the time I was a medical student, just, attending these residency ophthalmology, conferences and meetings, to when I actually started residency outright myself. Was he said, you have to record everything. You have to record every single case.
Yeah.
And, he has all this footage, and he goes back, and he's so passionate about, submitting things to film festivals. And so I recorded all of my cases. And I think what you said, reviewing every case, being conscientious about it. But then when you do that on scale, let's say you're doing high volumes, high surgical volume, now you're not just going through the reps, but you're going through the reps with a mindset of how can I make each next rep even better than the one before it. And it's like an athlete training, right, for a sport, or a musician listening to their recitals or their rehearsals and saying, okay, that didn't sound right, or the tempo on that was off. How can I change that and make that better? I think it's just really what it comes down to. If you're fortunate enough to have cultivated a setting where you can do high volume, you're fortunate enough to have had mentors to make you aware that you need to be conscientious about what you're doing, it's just a mindset of wanting to grow as a person and as a surgeon, because you can go through 20 years, 30 years of a career, and if you're content with the way you've done cataract surgery, maybe now, you haven't kept up to date with technology, you haven't kept up to date with the latest clinical guidelines or advancements in medicine, and you're still practicing the same way you did before, when you were a resident all those years ago. And I feel like that's kind of a disservice to not just our patients and our profession, but almost to yourself, because I feel like 99.9% of people have the potential to grow and be better. And, it's I think a combination, again, of repetition and then being conscientious. So when did you realize, or at what point in your career did you realize, like, hey, I'm able to do something, or maybe I'm doing something here at scale that maybe the average ophthalmologist is not doing? Like, when did you realize you had kind of advanced or reached that next level?
Gosh, yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I mean, cataract surgery is one of those skills that's constantly evolving, and you constantly need to be challenged. And I do talk about it. Some people say, well, how long does it take to train a LASIK surgeon to be sort of world class? I said, I could probably do that 3 to 6 months. And they said, okay, well, how long does it take to train a cataract surgeon to become world class? I said, you know what? Or they'll say, how long did it take you to become, world class cataract surgeon? I said, you know what? I'll tell you when I get there. And meaning, you're always learning. As much as after I did my first 1,000 cases, I was like, oh, now I've figured it out. But then I look back, my 10,000 cases was way better than my 1,000 cases, and it's a constantly evolving skill. You've never really reached the top. Versus, I think, LASIK, as far as a technical skill, is relatively straightforward. There's a lot of nuance in how do you treat, what do you treat, what's the right prescription. But technically, when you're actually walking through the steps, it's relatively straightforward. Short of, maybe there's some complication management that are unique that you have to work through. But cataract is just another level that is a constant effort to improve. And I'd say I'm still not there yet. I'm still learning.
So Bob Oshry, and I've told you this before, has a saying that if you're on the cutting edge, you're going to get cut.
Yeah.
So being in the position you're in now, where you've built this practice, you've had this career, you have such wonderful, amazing hands. When you're working with a new technology for the first time, let's say, what's it like when you're used to getting great outcomes and now all of a sudden you're using a product and maybe you're involved in the early trials and the results aren't that great? What would you tell to people who shy away from, let's say, embracing things early and just waiting for other people to vet it out? Like when Charlie Kelman introduced phacoemulsification, right? There were so many people who either were against it or didn't adopt it for many, many years later. So as an early adopter of technology, as someone who's in the battlegrounds, playing around with the latest and helping forge that path forward for the rest of our colleagues in the rest of our field, and ultimately for our patients, how do you have, what's your mindset when you go through that?
I think you want to be able to find where you're comfortable in, and I think everybody has a different comfort zone, and there's some people that are sort of innovators that are, let's say, first in, and then maybe you have something like early adopters. I forget, there's a name for each one of these stages, and there's another stage that's sort of more with the bulk of the herd, where you're sort of waiting for everything to be already figured out, cooked, and ready and fully baked. And everybody's going to be, more comfortable in one of those zones. You're going to find whatever you're personally comfortable with. And so I think, and the innovators that are working through sort of have that passion to try to take something that's new and novel and work with it. And they understand that it's not fully figured out yet. If you look at the first and second cataract surgery lasers, they were a little bit problematic. I mean, it was a little bit challenging as far as docking and OCT guidance and, understanding how do you do the capsulorhexis and how do you divide the lens and how do you make sure there's not too much air bubbles inside the capsular bag or whatever it might be. There was a lot to learn. And, the early innovative mindset was comfortable working in that space and working through it versus other people say, you know what, maybe I'll be an early adopter and jump in relatively early, but most of that stuff has to be relatively figured out. I'll be maybe, first in my state, but I don't necessarily be first in the world to do something or whatever it might be. And then you have the other people are saying, you know what, I'm going to wait till this is totally figured out, where the finances are figured out, the techniques are figured out, and they'll wait. And there's a lot to be said for these people, because let's say even the early adopter, they're going to pay top dollar for that femtosecond laser. The laser company is going to say, okay, it's going to be $1 million for this laser. If you want to be first, this is what it is. And so they're going to pay a pretty pennies. And then maybe the technology doesn't really pan out. And you might be like, oh my gosh, I bought this. It doesn't really do what I want it to do. And it's money wasted. Versus if you're waiting in this sort of bulk of the herd and saying, you know what, I'll let these guys take the arrows, figure it out. And now I'm going to buy this laser when it's on sale or a quarter of the price, when we already have the financial model figured out. And that's great. So I think you just have to find out where you're going to be most comfortable and more or less what drives you forward, and everybody's going to find a different spot to sit in.
So I think one of the disservices we've done to ourselves as ophthalmologists, and we're talking on the topic of maybe outcomes not being that great or having complications, is we have become so good at what we do that maybe the non-ophthalmologist or the layperson who's not a physician or a surgeon looks at cataract surgery and is like, oh, that doesn't look that hard. Like that's a 5-6 minute surgery. It looks so simple. And I've always felt that a hallmark of a really, really great surgeon is that someone who's an onlooker who maybe doesn't know what's going on looks at that and says, maybe even they won't say it out loud, but they'll say internally, I could probably do that, right?
Right.
That's when you're looking at truly just an amazing balance and dance of, just millimeter level accuracy and precision and hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of repetitions that went into developing those subtle movements. I remember, we have people come in all the time and observe us doing surgery, and maybe you make some small maneuver and they're like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I have to think to myself, they don't understand the amount of time and effort that went into making that just small little pivot or that small little change in arc or degree that led to eventually, the rest of the case going really, really well or something. There's just so much nuance involved. People don't understand how acute cataract surgery is, right? We have someone's eyes literally in our hands, their vision, the way they perceive the world. And that is a lot of responsibility to be working in a millimeter level space and to be able to manipulate these really, really micrometer fine tissues to deliver sort of vision and functionality and livelihood back to people. And when there's a complication, as surgeons, we can be hard on ourselves and really take that to heart and get down. But if you're going to be a surgeon, there's going to be complications. Any surgeon who says they don't have complications is either not a surgeon or they're lying, right? Or they don't operate. So how do you handle complications or poor outcomes? How do you manage the pressure of surgery?
Yeah, I mean, you have to really work through that. I think you have to empathize. You have to be personal. You have to make sure you reach out to the patients that are having any kind of issue. You can't ignore it. You have to address it. It's easy to just put it out of sight, out of mind, but you want to be on top of it because, like anything, a complication could lead to other problems. It could start as a small complication, but it could, if you address it early and appropriately, you can often, minimize, issues. But if you ignore it or put it off, it could, lead to other things. So I think being aware, being on top of it, being, empathetic, all those things are important. Being straightforward, working with the patients, making sure that they know that you care about them, and you should care about them, and allows you to sort of make sure, number one, you address that complication, but also make sure that you don't try to repeat the same mistakes in the future. If you sort of put it out of mind, if you don't really care, then what's to say that you're not going to do it again or repeat the same issue? And you have to make sure you're staying true to yourself and true to your patients and trying to minimize every little thing that could be an issue as much as possible.
Everything you said is so spot on. I remember, not necessarily in my year, but I remember when I was a resident hearing other ophthalmologists, sometimes almost in like a braggadocious way, talking about, oh, I haven't broken a bag, or I graduated residency and I never broke a bag. And I never understood that because obviously you don't want to have any complications. But if I was having someone operate on my eyes, if I was having someone do cataract surgery on my eyes, I would not want to go to a surgeon who's never had a complication. I would want a surgeon who's experienced every possible complication in every type of manner, and who was diligent about learning from those mistakes, because God forbid if that complication were to arise or were to happen, they would be able to expertly navigate that because they've been through that before. And so I think it just comes back to what you said about, like, when we were reviewing surgical footage, trying to get better. Same thing goes sort of for complications. And there's the other aspect of that, which is now the human interpersonal quality, which is not just trying to avoid making that same maneuver that led to the complication again in the first place, but also getting better at empathizing with people and really trying to make sure that they understand you're there for them.
Right.
And refractive surgery, I feel like, is very different than the rest of ophthalmology, because in medicine, really, right? Or from maybe plastic surgery, because in everything else in ophthalmology is regarding pathology, loss of function, preventing or mitigating disease progression. Refractive surgery is about gain of function. Oftentimes we're operating on eyes that have very pathological amounts of refractive error, but a lot of times we're operating on eyes that are totally healthy. Patients can see 20/20 or even better, like 20/15 with contact lenses or glasses, and they're electing to have this procedure done. They're paying top dollar oftentimes for what they are perceiving as perfection. That places a whole extra level of pressure on the surgeon to really match those patient expectations and deliver those outcomes. That's not something we're taught in medical school. That's not something we're taught in residency. How did you go about fostering the ability to feel confident delivering that level of care to patients? Because to me, that's like the next level entirely.
Yeah, I think it's just working through a desire to always be better, and no matter what it is. So if it's surgery or clinic or call center or customer service or marketing, there's always room for improvement. And what happens is, as you're working through, invariably there's going to be some kind of hurdle that needs to be surmounted. It might be, for example, better outcomes with cataract surgery. And the current formulas are good, but they're not quite there. Maybe we're 80% chance of getting 20/20 or better. And we're like, gosh, we should be 90%. It's like, well, there's going to be a new IOL formula that somebody's worked out and put a lot of time and energy into, and raise it to 85. And they're like, well, if we had intraoperative aberrometry to take measurements inside the eye during cataract surgery, that might raise us to 90. Okay, great. Now we've had that innovation. Followed by maybe, well, we can never really predict the healing response. So now we have light adjustable lens that after the lens goes inside the eye may change a little bit. And now we have an ability to account for that. So there's always sort of this desire to not be satisfied with status quo, either in your own personal realm, but also for your field. And then once you reach that pinnacle, there's going to be another way to surpass that one way or the other. I think constantly pushing the limits is where we all move the field forward.
Is that what drives you or motivates you to be so involved with clinical research? Because here we're involved in, at any given time, 10 to 15 clinical trials, whether that's FDA clinical trials, IITs, our own sort of internal things we're working on.
Yeah, exactly. I think being involved in those efforts is, definitely an energy gainer. And I think we're constantly, in ophthalmology, we're looking at more or less 2 or 3 things. We're looking at safety, more or less eliminating adverse events, looking at efficacy, sort of attaining better vision, or looking at function, sort of obtaining a broader depth of vision, and constantly dialing those 3 things: safety, efficacy, and increased function. And if you look at all the technology that we've been involved with, either multifocal lenses or accommodating lenses or femtosecond lasers or intraoperative aberrometry or SMILE or whatever it might be, all those technologies are constantly pushing the limits on those 3 fronts.
The more we talk, the more I'm amazed at what you've been able to juggle and navigate and balance throughout your career. There's the OR aspect of things, surgery. Yeah. There's the clinic aspect of things. Yeah. There's the customer service aspect of things. There's the business aspect of things. There's the administrative management aspect of things. And now we're getting into research. How did you go? Because we have a very robust research department here. And how did you go about what was the vision for that? How did you build that?
It started off actually quite small. It's sort of like, wouldn't it be neat if we were involved with, this technology? Let's say it was intraoperative aberrometry, and more or less we bought that commercially. Said, gosh, this is great, but it needs help in these areas. So I think we should improve the nomogram for post-refractive surgery. So we were involved with their first study using intraoperative aberrometry to study post-refractive surgery. And then the next study was like, well, for dialing toric lenses, wouldn't it be nice if we had this kind of technology? So we're involved with the first studies that analyzed the outcomes for intraoperative aberrometry guidance for toric lenses. Now we use it routinely for that, but when it first was invented, it wasn't necessarily designed for that purpose. And so once we established a team that was interested in that, and invariably we started off with maybe a technician or 2 that was sort of had the same interest within our practice, like, oh yeah, it looks neat. I'll help with the data collection. I'll help enroll those patients. Then that team went from 1 individual to 2 individuals. So now we have 3 or 4 or 5 individuals that are in that department that have that same kind of interest and working through sort of that leading edge technology opportunity, that patients are also interested in. The patients are always looking for that next new thing, and they say, oh, now there's a lens that can do this. Yeah, I'll raise my hand. I'll be involved with that. And so it seems that you find the right patients, find the right technicians, find the right team that has that same interest. There's going to be opportunity for working with industry to provide that kind of care.
Shamik brought up something that I never really thought about, and it's something that's really stuck with me because it was so powerful. What he was saying is, so he was discussing how overseas, let's say in like India, you have ophthalmologists or surgeons who have their own private practice where, it's a business. They're obviously trying to deliver great patient outcomes, but it's a business. And then maybe X amount of time when they're not doing that, they're doing charitable work, they're doing surgery for free. And what Shamik was saying is, you can do that sort of stuff here. It might be that's not necessarily the model or expectation.
Right.
If you do service or volunteer surgeons, like we've done a lot of charitable surgery over the past year with Operation Sight for the Asquith Foundation. But he was saying he almost views being involved with research as a charitable act, because now maybe there's a patient who can't afford a multifocal lens or the latest in technology, or can't afford to have ICLs or SMILE done, but they're a great candidate for this research. Well, if they're a candidate, they can get into that.
Right.
They can have the surgery for free. And a lot of times, because our FDA is so slow, it's not like this is the Wild West and they're guinea pigs. This is technology that's been vetted overseas in other countries in hundreds or thousands of patients. So like the EVO ICL, for example, we have trials going on where patients, if they're a candidate, could be enrolled in that study. They're getting technology that's been vetted for over a decade overseas. We know it works, and we know it delivers great outcomes. And it's just, I'd never thought about that before. I never viewed research sort of from that lens, and it's really amazing.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And it is a great win for everybody, a win for the patients, win for the industry partner that's provided that lens, and then the doctors that are involved with it. And I think it is a great opportunity for those patients that, want to have access to technology, and then, have a company that's willing to provide it, in exchange for being involved with the trial. So I totally agree with Shamik's thoughts around that.
Ophthalmology is kind of unique in that industry is very intertwined with clinical research, and a lot of our big advancements in ophthalmology that have either come out of the private sector or have come from collaborating with industry. And you see, I think, a lot of residents or fellows, and they're like, oh, I want to get up on the podium, or I want to work with industry, or I want to give this talk. When you were early on in your career navigating that journey about being passionate about your craft and then trying to push outcomes forward and being involved with latest technology, how did you navigate sort of industry itself, contracts or honorariums or speaker fees, or trying to maintain integrity and credibility like you touched on earlier?
Sure. I think I realized pretty much early on that it's not necessarily a financial win per se to work in that space. I think it is a break-even endeavor, but it has sort of rewards that are hard to quantify. It allows you as a clinician to understand how that product might work in the future. So when it is clinically available, you have a jump start in your region. Do you invest in the technology, or do you wait, maybe say it was pretty good, but there's going to be something better coming down the road? So it gives you sort of a look underneath the covers to see what's coming. So navigating sort of that aspect from a financial aspect, I think some people say, oh, I want to get involved in research, but I hear you can, have you make a lot of money from the trials. I said, well, yeah, but you have multiple individuals that are in your research department. You have to have research space. You have to dedicate time and energy to that. So when you look at everything involved, it's probably more or less financially a break even on the surface, but there are things that are sort of intangible as far as being involved with that study.
And I guess, to sort of summarize everything we've talked about, at least in terms of, your involvement with technology and industry and pushing things forward, you're someone who had RK on your own eyes.
Right.
And you see how far we've come from multifocal lenses, light adjustable lenses, ICLs, SMILE.
Right.
where do you see sort of the future of cataract and refractive surgery in the next 10 years, let's say, and what are you most excited about next?
Yeah, I think we definitely have work to do in the presbyopia space. Right now, the leading technology is multifocal, which provides an outcome that's reasonable, gives it full depth of focus, but the quality of vision is good but not perfect. And so not every patient wants to have that sort of sacrifice of sacrificing some of the quality to gain the depth of focus. I think in the future, we're going to have lens products that will have full range of vision without the necessary side effects of dysphotopsia or glare halo, those sort of things. So I see accommodated lenses working in that space, aperture optics working in that space, potential sort of new age technology that might have some kind of electrical component that allows for electrical stimulation or accommodation. So I see that we're definitely it's still early in what we're going to see in our space. There's so much that can happen. I think a lot of it, which is interesting, we see all this innovation in ophthalmology because there is a private pay or out-of-pocket portion of what we do. If you look at, let's say, cardiology, obviously we've had some huge gains in cardiology, but more or less there's a limit to what can be paid as far as reimbursement. There's a reimbursement that's capped for, let's say, cardiology. There's not necessarily out-of-pocket avenue. If you want something better, if you want a more mechanical heart or something, you may not necessarily have that opportunity to pay for that. It's got to be reimbursed by insurance. What we see in ophthalmology is there is a cash pay component, so that if somebody can dream it, somebody can think it, and chances are someone's going to want it and pay market rate to achieve it. And so with that, you see investment into the field because there's going to be a return on that investment. If you invest in the right technology that's going to improve somebody's livelihood or function, there's going to be a return on that. And there's not necessarily a ceiling to what we can achieve like we might see in other sort of reimbursement or insurance reimbursement areas.
One aspect of your professional life we have not touched on, and we've covered so much from, like you said, surgery, medicine, business, admin, industry, research. We haven't really talked about another, what I would consider a major aspect of what you do on a day-to-day basis, which is teaching.
Yeah.
We talked about how you're fellowship director to what I consider the best refractive cataract surgery fellowship in the country, and maybe even in the world, when you look at sort of the experience that people have the potential opportunity to take with them for the rest of their lives. What motivated creating a private practice fellowship and sort of what led to the infrastructure and the way it is today?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost by chance that we got involved in the fellowship. I think my partners and I sort of took it for granted what we were doing at the time of just this leading edge cataract surgery, refractive research, or whatever technology we're working with. We just assumed everybody was doing that. And then we would have a couple residents come through and observe what we're doing. They're like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. We're not being exposed to this type of technology or this type of style of practice. And one resident in particular, Amir Marafi, came by and he observed once and said, this is amazing. Give me a big hug at the end of the day. And the next time I saw him, he came back, started the day with a hug and watched what we did. And at the end of the day, gave me another big hug. He's like, Dr. Wiley, this is the greatest day I've ever had in my career, and really complimentary and so enthusiastic. He's like, you know what, if you were to do a fellowship, I would love to be your fellow and I'd love to learn from you. And at the time, I didn't necessarily realize or understand what kind of opportunity we might have to give to a young ophthalmologist to learn what we were doing. And so I guess in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense. Like I explained, we learned cataract refractive surgery over 20 years and had a slow trickle of innovation. But somebody coming out today has to be able to understand all the technologies that I've learned since residency. And there's probably 10 different new technologies that I've learned over the years. And so it's so much more challenging to stay competitive and stay active as a young ophthalmologist. And so to have the ability to sort of fast track a doc to expose them to the technologies that I learned over 2 decades for them to learn over a year is such a huge gift. And I look at what I said earlier, what allowed me to excel quickly is having some mentors that gave me that early confidence. And in retrospect, maybe it was earned or not earned, but regardless, they gave it to me, that early confidence allowed me to sit down and do what I needed to do, and to have that ability to give back and give a young resident that confidence that after a year they can enter the ophthalmic world and be truly a world expert in cataract refractive surgery and carry that to their market, I think is really rewarding. And quite frankly, it's also made me a better surgeon. It made our team a better team. We have one other set of eyes that's constantly looking at all the charts, looking at all the surgeries, assuring we're getting the best possible outcomes. We're busy, and sometimes, if I'm busy seeing a patient, to have one other doctor with the expertise that we've imparted to them to be able to help with the team effort to see the patients or address the issues that may be there, I think is invaluable. So I realize that as much it is an effort to teach, there's a reward to our patients, to myself personally. It's making me a better provider. It's making our team better. It's helping our field push forward. I think all those things are invaluable.
So if there's a resident who is maybe unsure of what they should do next,
right?
The landscape of anterior segment fellowships is so broad and diverse. Do you do it in an academic setting? Do you do it in the private sector? Do you do a cornea fellowship?
Right.
Do you do a cornea refractive hybrid fellowship? Do you do a glaucoma and anterior segment fellowship? Do you do a pure anterior segment fellowship? Do you do just a fellowship focused on cataract surgery, or practice that's so heavily refractive that they don't really even do a lot of cataract surgeries, and maybe they really outsource a lot of the posterior segment part of the exam? What would you tell that resident who's trying to navigate all of that, and where do you feel like this fellowship fits in, and who is this fellowship really for?
I think I would recommend any resident to sort of picture where they want to be in their career 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And that's different for everybody. Some people want to be in an academic institution, being a chairman of the department, or be a department head, or whatever it might be. If that's your path, you should choose a fellowship that's going to allow you to achieve those goals or walk down that path. If you want to be, let's say, private practice cataract surgeon like myself, then look at a fellowship like what we offer. There's a lot of practices that are in between, our styles that are in between. Or look at a teacher that's going to teach the way that you learn. If you're going to learn more, didactically, then maybe a more didactic focused fellowship. Or if you're going to learn more hands-on focused fellowship. Everybody learns different. Everybody has different goals for their own career. But more or less, if you can try to find a mentor or path that's similar to where you want to be in the future, I think that's the best advice for this young residents.
Well, Bill, I would say this is probably the latest podcast I've recorded, and I'm not tired one bit, and I'm looking across at you, and if you're tired, you're certainly not showing it. And as much as I want to keep you here for another 2-3 hours, I want to be respectful of your time. I know it's been a long day, but I was at ACOS with you just this past weekend, and I had the good fortune of having the opportunity to present. And so I was presenting a case, really sort of what I would consider a high level case on SMILE. And, there was the audience kind of trickled towards the end because everyone's got to catch flights and stuff. And, but I sort of gave you a small tribute, and I just wanted to say face to face, because my time here is winding down, and it is bittersweet because I feel like I could stay here another 5 years and every day still learn so much from you and from Shamik. But it's been the honor of a lifetime being one of your fellows. And I've said this to you before, but I'm so proud to be part of the lineage that you've created. I'm so proud that our paths are intertwined, and we're forever going to be connected and be good friends and see each other at meetings and collaborate together in the future. And every day of this past 13 months has been like IV rocket fuel, just from an intellectual standpoint and curiosity and trying out new things. And I've grown so much, not just as a surgeon, as a clinician, but as a person. And I feel like it's really with you that I've found this synergy or this like mirror that I was looking for and couldn't really find. And so I hope going forward, I can make you proud. And
I'm sure.
Thank you for everything.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Arjan, I really appreciate the energy that you've brought to our fellowship. I definitely see that you have a huge ambition, and I can see that you have a goal in your mind, and I have no doubt that you'll achieve it. You've been a pleasure to work with, and I know when you chose our fellowship, you had plenty of options around the country. There's a lot of our colleagues that would have definitely enjoyed to have you on the team. So I'm so glad that you chose us and to work with. And you've been truly a pleasure. You've really pushed Shambhik and I to be better surgeons, to be better clinicians, to be better researchers. And you've been a true asset to our team. And so as much, as we'd like to have kept you on the team, it would have been awesome. I understand your goals and aspirations, and I'm so excited for you to join, two of my best friends in ophthalmology, Netta and Robert. They are going to be such great partners for you, and it's truly one of the best practices in the country. And I'm so proud that you're going to join them and likely be on a partnership track quickly and help raise the quality of care that they bring out there. And you'll be such a great asset to their team. So super excited for you, and thanks for all the work that you put in. I know this year has not been easy. It's a lot of work and time, energy. So truly appreciate everything you've done for us.
Every second of it has been completely worth it. So thank you, Bill. Really.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been awesome.
Yeah, thanks.